23rd celebrity typing live stream. So let me just quickly share my screen so we can start for today. Excellent. Right. Thank you everyone for being so amazingly organized. I've got 3 super chats already. Fantastic. And Isaac, and congratulations to Isaac, by the way, who has managed to now qualify as a WSS Sociologist, having completed the type mastery pathway and submitted a remarkably good essay on Steve Ditko. He is now a WSS Sociologist. He is actually hosting right now a watch along on the voice chat section of the World Socionic Society Discord server. I have just put a link to the Discord server if anyone wants to join him on the voice chat for Discord. Everyone's totally welcome to that. Just click the link in the chat, and yeah, you can go along and you can join the watch along with Isaac. So fantastic, and Shelley. Oh no, Holly's also on there. Fantastic. So yes, in terms of who we're starting with today, and just what the rules are for anyone who doesn't know. For me, if you want me to type anyone, any public figure, has to be someone who's public enough. I know enough about, I can find out enough about them to type them. Could be historical, could be a world leader, could be a celebrity, could be absolutely anyone, as long as there's enough public information about them. Simply send a super chat of at least $20 and I will type that person. Now, based on the rules I've set, you can, of course, donate more than $20 in order to be prioritized. That's exactly what I'm going to do right now because Shelley's very kindly donated $30. So I'll start with Hugo Hamlet. So thank you, Shelley, for that. Hugo Hamlet. That is an interesting name because both Hugo and Hamlet are names which are typically used by the Russians to refer to the types, specifically the ESC and EIE. So let's take a look to see what Hugo Hamlet is about. All right. Hugo Hamlet, who is this? Is it this person with this YouTube channel? I think that might be it. Hmm. All right. Hugo Hamlet. Never heard about this person before. This channel is my joy channel. Have fun. Life is short. Oh, we have a little video as well. Couldn't bother with it. He is in the sea. He's just standing there in the sea. And I think his nipples are on display through his shirt. Interesting. Um, let me see. Hugo Hamlet, businessman. Oh, this is a song. I have a feeling I'm gonna get into trouble if I start playing his music. Um, let's get a little bit and then I'll cut out. This is one's called Businessman. That's had 255,000 views. Very, very good. Let's see that one quickly. 10 seconds, maybe not more than that.
I am proper. I am official. I am a worker.
Okay, she's clearly a performance artist.
Space. I'm
Wow.
I'm I will
Very offbeat. Okay. To get the idea, he's sort of right. What's this? Interview he gave at a party he wasn't invited to. Okay. Pretty very sort of flamboyant
You're right.
clothing.
Can I ask you what your name is?
Lacey.
Lacey. What's your name?
My
It
name.
reminds me a little bit of
Oh wow, Lacey.
a little sort of Ziggy Stardust style.
No, nothing.
Nothing. Did you ask for names?
Julia.
Wow. My name's Hugo. Have you not heard of me? Huge on YouTube. What's your name?
Jasmine.
Wow. What is she? She's
Definitely a
taking
Living Stardust vibe.
Natasha Zonko. You right, guys? Can I ask your names?
Natasha Cinco.
You're the real deal.
I'm Tatiana Mirova.
Oh, that's a nice name.
I'm Mirova.
Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Natasha.
Very
Actually,
deliberately awkward.
Cheers, big ears. Big ears or small ears?
Biggie.
Can you get her ear in?
Never seen it before?
I've never seen your ear before, no. What's your name? Wow.
Arina.
Arina the diva. Where are you going? Come back. Evening. Oh, wow. You speak Russian. Привет, как дела? Very good. Спасибо. And you speak
Right.
Russian too?
Yes.
Why? Why is he doing this?
There you go. From the Eagles.
He's just doing stuff to confuse people.
Giggly. Sorry?
Love the street.
Why is he doing this?
That's not. What is.
Why is he doing this? How to not commit chop suey.
Idioma. I'm going to be talking to you about how to surrender to any, despite the weather, your plasma, ident, the shumana.
We have 1.2 thousand views for this.
Feel where you are.
Exactly. Shelley, I think you're exactly right. He is just a vibe. He is a vibe. He creates vibes.
So what do you do?
It's sort of like a it is very Ziggy Stardust, I must say. Yeah.
Stop.
What's this now?
Wrong. To pinch yourself and prick yourself into realizing that now is the only moment you ever will have. The waiting game is over, and you're living a beautiful life, as if you've put on a pair of glasses which allow you to see color for the first time in your whole life. The magic, the tears of joy, and the realization that your life is absolutely perfect and whole. You are not the place you live and the relationship status and your muffles and kerfuffles of inner yearnings and grief and all these things, but you're tied together by a wholeness. That is the whole shebang, and there is no need to worry when things get down, but it's part of it. And that is the magic, because it continually goes on and on and on, and you continue to grow, even in conflict. So next time, your mother says something to you and you feel rattled, if she's alive, know that that's beautiful, and that's part of the whole shebang, because you're just playing the game of love, aren't you? Because if there wasn't any conflict, there wouldn't be any love, because you're not fighting for anything.
There we go.
So
explicit
continue to fight,
explicit
to live,
beta
to breathe, to yearn,
values there.
to know that there's nothing wrong with you. Oh no, absolutely nothing wrong with you. Wherever you are is perfect. Whatever you see and say and do is perfect. Live with kindness and enjoy your life.
One thing I'll say, for those who might be caught between which beta NF type he may be, because I'm assuming everyone largely thinks he must be a beta, and no one thinks he's a beta ST. He's very obviously a beta NF, because the whole thing is vibe. It's nothing really concrete or solid about this person. It's vibe. But which one? Now, what we can see already is this person is really all about the vibe rather than necessarily the particular narrative he wishes to set. And he will have maybe a number of different narratives to suit the overall vibe he's creating, the sort of the pastiche feel of who he is. And so on the basis of that, I'd be inclined to say he's an EIE rather than an IAI. I think that the Hamlet of the Hugo Hamlet is ringing true rather than a Yesenin. Um, to go into an environment to start asking people questions like that, there's something a bit intrusive about it. There's something a little bit I'm now setting this awkward mood going on there, which doesn't make sense for an IEI where the sensation and the ethics are both flexible. No, it makes more sense that his stubbornness comes in the ethics and sensation. So he makes the impact. He sets the mood. He sets the tone, even if that's quite an awkward and quite uncomfortable tone. Just going in there asking these random women these strange questions and commenting on their ear sizes. An IEI is far more fluid and subtle in that sort of department. Meanwhile, I think he's that's sort of, we just said there was a bit of sort of flow of consciousness a bit. There's less of a structure going on. I don't see much in terms of structure. It seems quite random videos going on here. There's, I'm sure he thinks about what he's doing, but it doesn't strike me that he's tying it all together coherently, just from what I've been able to see so far, which suggests to me actually the more fluid and flexible part is actually the intuition and the logic. So that would say EIE, not IEI. But let's see if there's anything else we can look at just to make sure of that. What else? What else? How to not commit chop suey. What does it mean not to commit chop suey? He's saying things for the vibe. Have compassion. Right, find your rock, move at your own pace. Lovely little bits of advice he's giving out. But is it very sort of feel good? It doesn't strike me that there's a sort of a narrative he particularly wants to set here. It is more, again, creating the vibe. Your moment. Lambo. Let me see another one. Maybe Don Juan. That looks interesting. Maybe Lambo. That's got a lot of views. Your moment. Let's look at your moment. 5 years ago, there. And to get to he's striving to be a performance phenomenon. That seems to be what he is. And that makes sense for Niami. Oh. Hmm. Oh, is one of them live.
Let's go.
But yeah, he very much reminds me of David Bowie. He is very David Bowie-ish. I think that's quite deliberate. Deliberately androgynous. The clowns, this one. Okay. Oh, okay. He's moving. So there isn't that much rhyme or reason to what he's doing. It is just, it's very playful. It's very zany. It's very like, what's going on? And that's what gets you talking about him. Is he talking on the phone to the showerhead? He is talking on the phone to the showerhead. So he often changes that, has a lot of different sorts of outfits. It's playing with vibes, it's playing with different sort of guises and disguises. It's also putting this sort of irreverent, slightly childlike humor. The introverted logic is not really in the room here. It's the extroverted ethics. There's a good amount of extrovert intuition supporting, and it is vibe creation. What's he doing? What's that? There's no music. There's no music here at all. He is doing a mime act. He's doing a kind of mime act. There's a keyboard. He has not played the keyboard yet. Maybe he'll start soon. Is he going to start on the keyboard? He is not on the keyboard. Oh, now there's music. What's he done? He's taken off his top. How do I easily differentiate from IE? I do not think that there is any sense of extroverted logic whatsoever in this person's value. Like, he's very clearly trying to be and become a vibe. That strikes me as the motivation. Like, who is this person without an audience? An IE would not seem to be someone who lives to differentiate themselves to an audience. Though they can, of course, be entertainers, but usually it's their own fascination, different ideas and perspectives that drives them, and people join them for the ride. Whereas for this person, it seems very much like the vibe, the imagery is in of itself what he wants to become and propagate on the internet. And that tells me EIE over IEE. But yes, you'd expect an EIE to show IE-ish tendencies in terms of a large amount of background extrovert intuition, which we are seeing here. But there's nothing about this YouTube channel that I've seen so far that would suggest to me Delta. If someone asks, what is the use of this? There is no use to this. And maybe an EII could do things without a very clear use, but an IE without a bit of a mobilizing function, you'd expect there to be some sort of use coming out of this. And there isn't. There's nothing remotely practical or useful about any of this. That's not the point. Okay, now he's playing music. And he's singing in Spanish. Because it's just random. It's just chaos. He is manifesting chaos. Why do this? Because of the vibe. Because why not do this? Yes, it is uncomfortable. You're quite right, Isaac. It does. It's this when he goes out and speaks to people and asks a question, that is uncomfortable. There's no regard at all for introverted sensation. Experience the pain. What's this about?
Bonding. I hope you're having a lovely time. And you're connecting with the fact that, well, everyone's on their own experience, doing their whole thing. They're doing their life. But the thing in life is that we're met with resistance. And we think, oh, fuck, I can't do this or that, or I feel kidnapped, or I feel something just getting in the way. But the truth is that if you killed yourself, you would just feel free. You would feel fine, you'd be connected to the heavens, or whatever. But the truth is that you're here for the experience. You're here to feel everything.
He's provocative as well. He does things in a deliberately provocative way. IEs do not tend to do things in deliberately provocative ways. They are flexible in their ethics. EIEs will say something and put something out there, even if it's uncomfortable, because it will make you think. It'll make you react in some sort of way. Because that's, again, it's a stubborn and valued area. Yeah. So this person is, I'm very sure, an EIE. Let's move on now. Let me see. Who has made the largest super chat? Well, £20 actually goes quite a bit further than $20. So I'm going to go for Claudia's next. Michael Morpurgo. Let's do Michael Morpurgo. Very good. Thank you, Claudia. Michael Morpurgo is an author. I've actually read a couple of his books, but ages ago. Here we go, Michael Morpurgo. Very good suggestion, Claudia. I really like your suggestions. So Sir Michael Andrew Bridge Morpurgo, born Bridge, is an English book author, poet, playwright, and librettist who is known best for children's novels such as War Horse. Yes. Anyone seen the play for War Horse or the film? Very, very good stuff. His work is noted for its magical storytelling, for recurring themes such as the triumph of an outsider or survival, for characters' relationships with nature, and for vivid settings such as the Cornish coast or the trenches of the First World War. There's a very, from what I recall of, say, War Horse, there's a lot of romanticism about it. Let me see. Let's go to Grok. I said this. I like to go to Grokopedia. Right. Let's go to that. Right. He's approximately authored 130 books, often for themes of war, nature, and human resilience. His prominent work, the novel War Horse, depicts the experience of a horse during the First World War, and achieved widespread acclaim through adaptations into Tony Award-winning stage production and 2011 film directed by Steven Spielberg. He co-founded the educational charity Farms of City Children with his wife Claire, establishing working farms in Devon, Wales, and Gloucestershire. He served as the UK's third Children's Laureate from 2003 to 2005, promoting literacy and storytelling. He's the Officer Order of the British Empire. Yeah, so pretty major author. Well, Michael Andrew Bridge in St. Albans. That's actually very close to where I am, St. Albans. It's like neighbours, well, in Hatfield. It's a neighbouring district. Actors Tony Van Bridge and Kip Kametz, daughter of Belgian poet Emile Kametz, part of an artistic family, including performers and writers. This is interesting. Upon Van Bridge's return from service in the Royal Navy, Kametz had begun a relationship with Jack Morpurgo, a writer and academic. The couple divorced. She married Jack in 1945, after which Michael adopted his stepfather's surname. All right. I said in London, McCord attended primary school. Though wartime disruptions and subsequent relocations marked his early years. And yet his mother, a trained actress with multilingual background, born in Yugoslavia, raised partly in Milan, fostered a love of literature, bringing aloud to her sons, including Rudyard Kipling's Just So Stories, A. Milne's poetry. And Jack Morpurgo, director of the National Book League and author of works on the publishing history, brought a scholarly environment to the home. They held high academic expectations for his stepsons, later expressing disappointment in their non-university paths. Age 7, he arranged boarding at a Sussex school, an experience Morpurgo later described as traumatic and isolating. These dynamics shaped his formative sensibilities, mother's performative storytelling, such as oral traditions and emotional engagement with words, contrasting with stepfather's more formal, intellectual approach to books. And yes, I think that's the thing. Michael Morpurgo is a very romantic kind of writer, not a very structural sort of person, from what I know. Yes, he wasn't so much for institutional literary culture over personal creativity. Okay. So he started off with military service, so as an officer of cadet, 1962, initial enthusiasm for the uniforms, camaraderie, instruction environment, though he disliked the disciplinary shouting. He departed after approximately 9 months, influenced by reading First World War poets such as Wilfred Owen, whose works prompted a brief reflection on military life and contributed to his decision to pursue civilian paths. From his exit from Sandhurst, studying English and French, he earned a degree before entering teaching. He began his career as a primary school teacher, where he engaged students through storytelling to maintain classroom attention. And his time teaching Year 6 pupils sparked his interest in children's literature, as improvised tales proved more captivating than standard texts. He became a headmaster, and that showed his narrative style, saying empathy and historical realism. Transition to writing occurred during his tenure as a primary school teacher in Kent, focused initially on published stories. To maintain the engagement, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. began improvising, crafting original tales, marked the genesis of his storytelling vocation, perhaps evolved into formal writing. It Never Rain consists of 5 short stories aimed at young readers, reflecting his early emphasis on accessible educational content. And this publication represents a shift from oral improvisation to professional authorship while still employed in teaching. Major works and themes, or for more than 150 books, which draw on historical events and personal storytelling techniques. His breakthrough novel, War Horse, narrates the experience of a Devon farm horse requisitioned for service in World War I, emphasizing loyalty amid conflict. This is keep in mind, this is loyalty to a horse, not to a person. Other prominent works include Private Peaceful, which follows 2 orphan brothers conscripted into the British Army during the same war. The Butterfly Lion, tale of a boy in colonial Africa who befriends a white lion cub, later reconnecting with its memory in England. There's Kensuke's Kingdom, about a shipwrecked boy's encounter with a Japanese castaway on a Pacific island, and Why the Whales Came, set in the Scilly Isles during World War I, involving children aiding a reclusive lighthouse keeper and beached whales. Recurring themes in his oeuvre center on the human-animal bond, often portraying animals as companions or rescuers in times of human vulnerability, as in narratives where creatures like horses, lions, and whales facilitate emotional, physical salvation. War and its psychological toll form another core motif, with anti-war sentiments conveyed through depictions of trench warfare's brutality, familial separation, and moral dilemmas faced by young soldiers, underscoring grief, sacrifice, and the futility of violence without glorifying combat. Broader explanations of nature, environmental stewardship, family resilience, and courage under adversity appear across his historical fiction and adventures, frequently employing first-person perspectives that also tend to evoke empathy and reflection on loss and redemption. His works received widespread critical acclaim, particularly their emotional depth and historical resonance in children's literature. He advocated for literature over literacy, emphasizing storytelling's role in fostering imagination over rote education. So, very sort of in the MBTI, what are called NFE tendencies here. Let's see what else. Critics have praised War Horse for humanizing World War I's equine casualties, estimated 8 million, drawing from his research to historical accounts of horses in combat. His influence extends to inspiring young readers and aspiring writers through vivid narratives about empathy of historical realism, prompting reflections on conflict's futility and environmental stewardship. Yep, we know about this already. What's up, Private Peaceful Kensuke's Kingdom, incredible deepening humans' understanding of trauma, resilience, or Walpurga's anti-war motifs. In some ways, he reminds me a little bit of almost an English writer version of Hayao Miyazaki to some degree. Criticisms of his writing are sparse, with reviewers occasionally noting formulaic elements in his prolific output, such as repetitive motifs of loss and redemption across titles. So his minor public scrutiny of adaptations and editorial choices, including his denial of intentionally omitting The Merchant of Venice from a Shakespeare anthology for children due to his anti-Semitic themes, insisting selections prioritize accessibility. He critiqued publishers' revisions to classics for contemporary sensitivities. He critiqued cultural revision to classical contemporary sensitivities, arguing such alterations undermine original intent and historical context, positioning them against perceived over-sanitization in literature. Overall, the reputation remains robust, with limited detractors amid broad endorsement from literary institutions. It's about farms for city children. Founded in 1976, to provide inner-city school children with week-long residential experiences on working farms, fostering connections to nature, food production, and rural life. So much skill learning, grounded skill learning, which originated from the Morpeth family's observation of urban children's disconnection from the countryside. These days, groups of children aged 8 to 19 undertake practical tasks such as animal care, crop tending, cooking from farm produce, and environmental stewardship, aiming to build self-confidence, teamwork, and resilience through hands-on immersion. This web challenge is greatest story, emphasizing role in transforming participants' understanding of sustainability and community. So, just reading through this, I would say he is most likely, on the course he was a Remainer. Sounds like someone who would also likely be a Remainer. That makes sense. Yep. Okay. Yep. Endorsed Extinction Rebellion. Yeah. Very much into sort of environment, that sort of thing. I'm inclined to think he is, just from my impression so far, most likely a Delta NF, I think, and potentially an EII, given just how much these relationships between, say, humans and animals are, and sort of unspoken relationships, such as with the horse, plays such a strong theme. I'll see if how that holds up. That's my initial impression. Let's see something from him. Let's see how he is in an interview. But yeah, my initial sense is maybe an EII. All right, here we go. I do think delta values make sense.
I became better in the first place by
A lot of introverted ethics.
not because they were arranged at all, because a happy thing happened, an accident happened. I was teaching in a school, to be honest. Michael, it's very good.
Oh, what happened? I just skipped that. What happened there? I'll try again.
First place by accident. All the best things in my life have happened not because they were arranged at all, but because a happy thing happened, an accident happened.
Best things happen by accident.
School, primary school. I remember we had a mobile classroom, and it was very hot in the summer, extremely cold. And I was teaching 35 children, and it was difficult. Like it is for most teachers, you've got 30, 35 kids in a class, all of them very different, all of them with their own likes and dislikes, and somehow you've got to make it all work. Anyway, I found there was only one thing that my 35 children really liked, and that was at the end of the day to listen to a story. So I'd be reading them stories from 3 o'clock to 3:30 because my head teacher told me to do this. It was a policy in the school. Everyone had to do stories between 3 and 3:30, and we'd read the stories. And the kids loved it. What they looked forward to all day was to sit down, not their desks, on the floor, and you'd read the story. I like doing it because I quite like acting. I quite like the whole business of putting a story across. It was brilliant. Then one day I read a book which wasn't any good. I thought it was. I was in the middle of the first chapter, and I saw them all looking out the window.
He thought it was very good, but he said it wasn't very good. He realized it wasn't very good.
Don't like it. She said, well, don't go in there again and bore them.
Hmm.
She said, why don't you tell them the story? You occasionally tell stories.
He listens to his wife for ideas on what to do. Hmm.
That way, she's a teacher too. She knows what she's talking about. That way, the book isn't between you and them. That way, you're just like this, and it's just you do it. So I remember staying up very late that night, went in there and said, look, we're not going on with our book. I'm going to tell you a story, which I've made up. They all went, no, sir. And I started telling the story, and it was a moment that changed my life, because in 10 seconds, 10 seconds, I had them really focused. Their jaws sort of fell open, because there was a big reason, and I didn't know it at the time. I just saw it happening. I meant it. I meant every single word I was telling them. Why did I mean it? Because I'd made it up. I'd done it myself. And I wanted them to be drawn into the story. And 10 minutes later, they were just completely lost in it. Now, this wasn't a quick story, I know it, published later. But what they recognized was
Self-deprecation.
no one was fooling anyone. This was this man telling a story that he really loved. And I learned from that, and I went on to every single afternoon. I told like a soap, got to an exciting point, and the bell went, and they would go, oh, yeah, great. Off they went back home, and we do the same thing the next day. And on a Friday afternoon, it's a true story, head teacher comes in, and she's there, she's got her arms folded, and she's heard about Mr. Morpoko's stories, and she wants to hear him. So I go on my story, and I finish it because it's Friday afternoon. She comes up to me and she says, Michael, it's very good, Michael, very good indeed. I want you to write it out to me and give it to me on Monday morning, because I have a friend who works at Macmillan, publisher in London, and we should send them off. And this went off, and I got a letter about 3 weeks later. Dear Mr. Morpoko, we liked your story. Could you write 5 more? And you'll be paid £75. That's how to get right. When I done one book,
Yep.
they were very pleased with it. I think it sold okay, not brilliant. They said, would you like to do another one? Said, well, yeah.
Okay. Already, sort of self-deprecating humor, and even saying how he reacts to getting the money, like, he's aware of a lack of dignity in responding that way. He has a bit of fun at himself in doing that, and there's quite some humility there as well. Saying, no, I didn't know what I was doing. This was wrong. I thought it was right. It was wrong. Very open about that sort of thing. And the fact that the reason why I engage with people is that there was almost a sincerity there that wasn't there before, because he was telling a story which he created himself. That's very interesting. That connected. He felt a connection with his audience, with the children, by doing that. Favorite country things, yes.
People don't come rushing here.
He likes that sort of red jacket, doesn't he?
Quiet
And
place,
that blue shirt.
quiet people, so you can have a quiet life.
You've got quite a
quiet life for a writer.
quite distinct style there.
Rather lovely for bringing up a family. So that's what it is. It's the quietness, and it's genuine.
Quietness, genuine. Quietness, genuine. Introverted sensing, introverted ethics.
Standing on the hill just behind my cottage, I live in a cottage, believe it or not, called Paradise Cottage. And I walk up the back on my regular walk, and I just have to go for 10 minutes. And I'm looking over the Torridge River towards a stand of oak trees, which have been there for hundreds of years.
You just get the sense he's quite a deeply sensitive individual.
Stand every single time you have to stand and stare. It's wonderful. It takes your breath away, whatever the weather. Top of the hill. I'm not going to tell you where it is, because other people will come and stand and stare too.
Doesn't want other people to come and stand and stare as well, to disrupt the peacefulness.
Here, that walk.
Doesn't want people to disrupt his peacefulness.
Down through.
That's the exacting tendency. That's the stubborn sensation.
Up the river, along the river, back up a track, home.
And remember, he did not like the military because he'd hate the disciplinary shouting. He hated the shouting, hated the intensity.
And I got a lovely walk I do all the way along to Hammersmith Bridge, over the Hammersmith Bridge, back along the other side of the river to Putney Bridge. And those 2 walks are my 2 favourites in the world. I used to think it was spring till we didn't have one. And also, I'm not sure it is. I think in a way autumn, because it's long and lovely here as the leaves go. Yes, you miss the swallows, of course you do, and the flowers in the woods. But there's plenty to look at.
So much introverted sensation here.
You don't have high expectations. Of probably summer. If it's not blue sky and sunshine, you think, oh, you've been cheated. You don't get cheated in the autumn. And also I'm in the autumn of my life, so it matches my mood.
And that's the stubborn ethics as well. That's the contrarian nature. He wants
almost
the expectation that nature should match his mood.
I've got a very nice wife of 50 years, but she's putting me on a strict diet. And steak guinea pie apparently, but I'm allowed to have 1 cottage pie every fortnight, if I'm lucky. It's what I'm holding, really. It's a half of local beer. This comes from Torbay, and it's lovely. I'm not a great drinker of lots, and when these people
doesn't drink much, no. This person likes everything in moderation. Moderation in things, nothing too much. This is not an extreme person. It's a very moderate person.
Spot. This is my favourite spot. It is usually occupied by other people with whom one is obliged to share the pub, unfortunately.
Doesn't
but
like to
there's a
share.
place there,
Doesn't like to share the
and
pub,
my
no.
wife sits opposite. And actually, it was here, years and years ago, that I first had the idea of writing a book called War Horse, because I met an old man, called Will Fellis, who lived in a cottage just down there, who had been to the First World War, aged 70, and I got talking, and it was in front of this fire, sitting in this very chair. Well, this chair, this pub, and this fire was definitely the first time it ever occurred to me. If we walked down past the village green, you could see the place where.
Let me see if there's any sort of like someone to get to this. How you get a sense of what War Horse is about. Oh, you get an interview about it. Okay, let's do that.
This is the local pub, and when we came to live,
Because I remember watching the film of War Horse and seeing the play. I'm thinking, why are they so obsessed with this horse? I don't get it. I remember not really getting War Horse because okay, it's a horse. They are all promising each other to really take care of this horse. It's a horse. Why is this horse so incredible? I still don't really understand War Horse. It's there's some sort of strange attachment all these different human figures have towards this horse. There's some sort of majesty to this horse that makes people feel that they need to look after it. They need to make sure it gets through the wall safely and return back to the person in Devon. And they make very sincere promises. I will look after this horse if he's been requisitioned, yada yada yada. It's very earnest.
So we discovered that there were 3 old men still in the village, then in their 80s, who were alive at the time of the First World War, and 2 of them had been to the trenches.
It's important him to get things historically accurate. Very important.
More than 6 months, really, and I met one of
He's
them.
relayed things truly.
And I simply said to him, Wilf, I gather you in the First World War. What regiment?
There's a sense of diligence there.
And he
as
didn't
well.
really answer my question. He just said, I was there with horses. And then he started talking. And his wife told me later he'd never talked about it before. I have no idea why he told me. I hardly knew the man. I have this feeling that he was passing something on. So there's a very, very strong bond between this village and this story, because the story came genuinely from here. There was a horse sale, I learned, of the horses on the village green out there in 1914. And many, many men went from the village. 7 of them never came back. On the war memorial there. So there's this whole weaving back into the history of the place.
So there's a lot of drawing from introverted intuition here. It's not value for its own sake. It's not setting a narrative. It's drawing from historical narrative and continuity to set a tale about relationships.
These were individuals, other sons. And there were young foals that grew up on farms and wanted
attachments. Attachments are very important. Attachments to animals, as much as books.
Without poetic overtones, it wasn't part of a created story. This was him.
Not part of the story with him. Sincerity.
And it was very powerful, and I didn't know how to tell it. And then this whole notion of telling it through the eyes of a horse, the mind of a horse, the life of a horse, came to me because of what he'd said about being there with horses. So I rang up the Imperial War Museum and I just asked them the question. Do you know?
Very matter-of-fact delivery.
So we don't have an accurate record.
The only intonation change is usually when you do something in a deliberately feigned way.
65,000. That's roughly the same loss rate as the men.
That's what you often find with super sincere communicators.
That was important.
Is there anything else we can? Sorts of trailers. Is it? You just get another example of what it's like. This is the Spielberg movie, of course. Emperor's Son. I think that's another. I think it's another Morpurgo, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a horse they found wandering about in no man's land. Kind of an horse. A miraculous kind of an horse, be my guess.
Everyone's obsessed with the horse. Yeah, that sort of looking at the horse, that sort of that big, wide open, wet-eyed look at the horse.
England is at war! You're at war! Assume that I'll look after him.
I promise you'll look after.
My horse, sir.
It's that. It's that. It's done so seriously. There's no irony in this. It is so earnest.
Flying over a war. Then you know you can never look down. Get to look forward, or you'll never get home.
It is. There's such a pure sentimentality to this.
And every man make himself and his country.
And you watch it like, why do I care about this horse? But the characters really care about this horse. I mean, I don't think it's quite as wet. I think Spielberg tends to make things a little bit more wet, but the underlying idea is there. The loyalty to the horse. It's there's a lot of introverted ethics in this. So yeah, I think EII for Michael Morpurgo. Could it be IEE? I don't think so. I think I think we can see there that he is exacting and he's contrarian. The stubbornness is in the ethics and the sensation once again, but in a delta introverted way rather than a beta extroverted way. In contrast to that Hugo Hamlet we looked at just before. All right, let's now look at some of the others. So Isaac suggested we look at Jack Kirby. So that's the last part of the original Marvel Comics trinity. Let's take a look at Jack Kirby. Let's go on to Grokopedia first. Jack Kirby, born Jacob Kurtzberg, was an American comic book artist, writer, penciler, editor, and publisher, recognized one of the medium's most innovative and prolific creators. His career spanned over 6 decades, beginning in the 1930s with newspaper syndication and pulp illustration before transitioning to superhero comics during World War II. He co-created Captain America with Joe Simon for Timely Comics, the precursor to Marvel. His bold, kinetic style and expansive mythological narratives define the visual language of superheroes, influencing generations of artists and establishing foundational elements of the genre's storytelling and aesthetics. And his partnership with Stan Lee produced the company's signature roster of characters, including the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, the Avengers, and the X-Men, which propelled Marvel to dominance in the industry through their grounded yet epic portrayals of heroism amid personal conflict. After disputes over creative control and compensation led him to depart Marvel in 1970, he joined DC, where he authored and illustrated the ambitious. Why does everyone sort of leave Marvel and join? Everyone ended up leaving Marvel at some point. It's quite funny. I think the only person who didn't was potentially Stan Lee, from what I can see from this. He authored and illustrated the ambitious Fourth World Saga, an interconnected series encompassing New Gods, the Forever People, Mr. Miracle, and Jimmy Olsen. So pretty epic stuff, the Fourth World Saga. And it introduced antagonists like Darkseid and exploring themes of cosmic struggle between good and evil. So big stuff. Right. Of course, we can say about him, he was born to Jewish immigrants from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, living straitened circumstances on Manhattan's Lower East Side. As youngest child, with his one younger brother named as the youngest child with at least one younger brother. It means he's not the youngest child. Strange. He navigates a childhood defined by the tenements, claustrophobic conditions, and neighborhood's volatility, including frequent street fights and gang rivalries that demanded physical toughness and quick instincts for self-preservation. He learned to defend himself, brother, against aggressors, instilling a resilience rooted in the immigrant imperative to fight back rather than submit, a dynamic shaped by both personal scraps and the broader undercurrents of anti-Semitism, yada, yada, yada. Right. Adolescence and narcissistic awakening. He left formal education to contribute to the family's income. He took odd jobs as a newsboy before securing entry-level positions in animation, including work as an in-betweener at Max Fleischer Studios. Largely self-taught, he honed his drawing skills by tracing figures from newspaper comic strips and editorial cartoons, developing an intuitive grasp of anatomy through personal practice rather than structured training. He frequently sketched New York City streets, observing the exaggerating human forms from life, gangs, laborers, and everyday scenes, which cultivates a distinctive style of dynamic, robust figures rooted in real-world vitality over idealized proportions. He experimented with pseudonyms such as Jack Curtis and Jack Cortez for early artistic endeavors, aiming to transcend ethnic or environmental constraints rather than conceal his heritage, a notion he later rejected outright. He regarded art as a pragmatic lifeline out of destitution, channeling raw determination to skill building as an alternative to institutional paths, reflecting a philosophy of self-reliance forged in poverty's crucible. A lot of toughness here coming out. And we know from that Fourth World, there's a lot of big, larger than life, almost cosmic level stuff. Which leads me to believe there's quite a balance there of extroverted sensation and introverted intuition already in this person. His early artistic development drew from newspaper cartoonists. His editorial illustrations emphasize bold lines and social commentary, influenced his initial approach to sequential storytelling and syndication work during the mid-1930s. What can we say? Exposure to the New York World's Fair, with displays of futurist technology, encouraged him to probe sci-fi narratives and serials such as Diary of Dr. Hayward, where he explored speculative plots involving scientific intrigue and otherworldly threats, testing the medium's capacity for ambitious world building amid rising pulp sci-fi popularity. All the stuff here. Tensions with Stan Lee. He initially submitted full scripts of stories, a practice consistent with prior work of other publishers, for transition to the Marvel method developed by Stan Lee. Under this approach, he provided a brief plot synopsis or verbal outline. Lee provided a brief plot synopsis or verbal outline, after which Kirby penciled the entire issue, including detailed breakdowns of action, character poses, and narrative sequences, leaving dialogue balloons empty for Lee to fill later. Kirby later recounted in interviews that this shift discarded his comprehensive scripting efforts, as he would verbally pitch story ideas to Lee and then execute them visually at home without further input until lettering. The rapid production demands exacerbated strains, with Kirby handling pencils for flagship titles, Fantastic Four, Incredible Hulk, Thor, Avengers on monthly schedules. This workload, driven by Marvel's expansion amid surging sales, reaching nearly 20 million copies annually, led to physical and creative fatigue, as Kirby produced hundreds of pages yearly under tight deadlines without royalties, relying solely on flat page rates. He expressed frustration of relentless pace, noting later reflections that generating original concepts only for them be appropriated strained his output. He didn't, it sounds to me like, okay, there was the workload. He didn't like the workload so much, but what he really didn't like was the appropriation of his work by Marvel. So keeping there was compensation. He advocated for raises amid booming circulation. Yet publisher Martin Goodman prioritized cost control, limiting adjustments, even as Lee's salary position as editor allowed public attribution of creative direction to him. Right. That's what led to the breakdown in their relationship. He warned 1970 of the frustration having to come up with new ideas and having them taken from him, said it rooted in Marvel Method's opacity. They developed the new gods and epic mythology, introducing a vast mythological framework centered on the conflict between two opposing planetary societies. We see the core concept of new gods working on Thor at Marvel, integrate them into the Marvel universe as antagonists to Asgard with teasers, initially such as Thor, and very ultimately developed it fully at DC. New Genesis represented a utopian realm governed by High Father Isaiah, emphasizing peace and enlightenment, while Apocalypse embodied dystopian tyranny under the despotic rule of Darkseid, a character Kirby positioned as an archetypal ultimate antagonist driven by the pursuit of an anti-life equation to dominate free will. It's interesting that, okay, he's battling with big themes, but the themes are very black and white. New Genesis, good. Apocalypse, bad. There's no sort of mix there. I think there's an interesting situation where the sons of Isaiah and Darkseid actually get traded and they start to grow up in each other's environments. So that's an interesting part. But the goodness and the badness is very clear. There's nothing morally grey there in what he put together. It is very stark. And technological innovations integral to the law blur the lines between science and mysticism, exemplified by mother boxes, compact living computers forged from an enigmatic element, capable of healing wounds, providing tactical data and interfacing psionically with users. These devices can activate boom tubes, swirling energy portals, enabling trans-dimensional transit across vast distances between realms like Earth and Apocalypse. Apocalypse is not just a planet, it is a realm, it is almost another dimension. And that characters like Darkseid do not simply exist in 3 dimensions. They go beyond that. And they project almost an avatar of themselves into the 3-dimensional. So that's all really almost otherworldly stuff. That's why Darkseid is so powerful. Perhaps the most powerful Superman villain. Political views. He serves as an infantry scout and combat artist in the 68th Infantry Division. It's a visceral anti-totalitarian stance, viewing fascism as an existential evil that demand immediate forceful position rather than diplomatic accommodation. Particularly in interviews, the only real politics I knew was that if a guy liked Hitler, I'd beat the stuffing out of him, and that would be it. Reading a first principles approach, prioritizing physical resistance to authoritarianism over abstract ideology. It sends a vision to communism, co-creating Fighting American, with Joe Simon as a superhero explicitly combating Soviet agents and domestic subversives amid the Red Scare. So there's ideology to this guy. And black and white is very clear to him. With a clear philosophy of individualism and moral duty as the foundation of heroism, countering narratives that romanticize passivity or collectivism. By his Depression era upbringing in the Lower East Side, where survival demanded self-reliance, he countered casual realism. True valor arises from personal sacrifice against overwhelming odds, as forged in military service rather than intellectual abstraction. You've got to put your money where your mouth is, essentially. He rejected pacifism or communal escapism. As Fabian said, tales of resolute fighters upholding societal order through action. He used bold, heavy black areas and thick outlines that create a high contrast pop art like boldness, some dramatic impact over subtle shading. It's interesting that both his characterization and his drawing are black and white. I mean, extraordinary high production rate throughout his career, penciling 3 to 6 pages per day during peak periods. It's basically to do that pretty consistently. That is quite something. His distinctive visual style, marked by thick, bold outlines, exaggerated musculature, dynamic perspectives, and explosive Kirby crackle energy passions, served as a template for generations of comic artists who emulated its bombastic energy to convey superhuman scale and motion. His narratives injected pop culture with underlying optimism, portraying flawed heroes triumphing via ingenuity and resolve against cosmic perils, a counterpoint to prevailing cynicism, resonating in the 1960s escapism. Thematic depth. He frequently humanized godlike figures by endowing with relatable flaws, family conflicts, and moral ambiguities, transforming mythic archetypes into vehicles for exploring human nature amid cosmic stakes. In series like Thor, The New Gods, details such as Odin and Darkseid exhibit pettiness, betrayal, and internal strife, rejecting idealized omnipotence in favor of portrayals that mirror mortal vulnerabilities and interpersonal dynamics. Yeah, I mean, but Darkseid is also pure evil. That's kind of the point of Darkseid. Contrary to interpretations framing his cosmology as escapist fantasy, his oeuvre underscores perpetual struggle over utopian resolution. The advanced society is still besieged by primal conflicts and the anti-life equation, symbolizing domination's seductive peril rather than harmonious progress. Academic roundtables and fan dissections highlight this focus on innate human drives, ambition, survival, redemption, necessitating ongoing vigilance, as in Orion's arc of inherited rage, demanding self-mastery amid galactic tyranny. So that's meant to be the son of Darkseid, but raised on Eugenesis. Such themes of culture resonated by challenging relativistic narratives, inspiring adaptations like DC Extended Universe's New Gods projects, and scholarly examinations of Kirby's myth-making as a bulwark against nihilism. All right. Let's see something of Jack Kirby. Let's see, maybe there's an interview. There's a whole documentary on him. Goodness. Here's an interview first. Let's do that before we see the documentary.
Kirby, characters a goal. We can do better. We want to do better.
Our spotlight today falls on the people who nibble at the edges of the entertainment world, like the rather surprising English group called The Clash. Also in that category is a man named Jack Kirby. He's the guy to blame if your kids or yourself seem to have an unnatural longing to turn on the TV set on a Saturday morning and join the company of some superheroes. Catherine Mann reports.
How many characters have you created?
It would probably come to an army division.
By his own admission, Jack Kirby's superhero creations are so numerous even he can't keep track. After some 40 years at the drawing board and an estimated 40,000 pages of action with such characters as Captain America, Fantastic Four, and the Avengers, Kirby is the undisputed king of comic book superheroes. What do your characters represent?
Well, the characters represent a sort of a transcendent feeling that we all have inside us.
Transcendent feeling.
We want to do better. We haven't learned to do better. That we can be the people that we lionize.
To anyone passing by his Southern California home, Jack looks like anything but a muscle-bound superhero. But according to him, it's what's inside the mind that counts.
If you look at my characters, you'll find me. No matter what kind of character you create, or assume. A little of yourself must remain there.
During the afternoon we spent with him, Jack couldn't resist including me in one of his action-packed plots. That's me being thrown from a helicopter by two vicious villains. But in the nick of time, I'm saved by a flying passerby. Oh, you're endowing me nicely there, Jack. Thanks a lot. The Catherine man you've never seen before and probably never will again.
It's not my normal masculine instinct.
As he sits each day at his board, alone with his characters, Jack Kirby is far from lonely.
I haven't got the trappings of a circus, but there in my mind is a very active and bright and colorful place. That's as good as any circus that I've ever seen. And I live with that, and I enjoy it immensely.
And that was of the new Catherine man, huh? Well, now we're going to move from the weird world to the real world.
About this one.
Okay, now we're going. So this is it. So,
Do a good job, Mike.
Jack, you have anything to
I'll
say?
give a kiss. How's that?
There you go.
No,
Jack, you give him a kiss.
no, it's fun.
It's about time you have to. Your belly then. Okay. Okay. Very much.
See, the toughness is very clear for him. It's sort of like someone who stands his ground and won't budge kind of toughness. It's a tenacity.
This is an actual thing.
That's
From Boy Commando.
what's the name of this?
This is Whitney Ellsworth. Jack Phillips.
Did he tell you about it?
Yeah,
Let me say something again.
yeah, this is the December post.
Oh, okay, the surfer. Well, okay, let's check it out.
Okay. There he goes. There's 3 or 4 songs there.
So let's see.
Let's see what else we can see from him.
Kirby, comic book characters a goal.
No,
We want to do better.
I think it's wrong.
Jack Kirby doesn't have a place in comic book history. He kind of is comic book history. If you're wanting to paint, you look at the masters. If you want to do comic books, you look at the masters. And, Jack Kirby is the master when it comes to comic books.
You really have to scratch really hard to find a truly creative person to put up against Jack Kirby. There really aren't that many.
I realized that he was creating a whole specific art style to himself, that he was this great exception
Very
to the rest that seemed to be
oddly
almost
colourful.
comic book.
I had never met Jack
The fourth world
I
stuff.
probably would have done that sleepwalking stuff.
new
that
gods.
everybody else.
Nobody had ever drawn comics that had quite that much pow.
And I would buy comic books according to whether or not Jack Kirby drew them.
Nobody could draw that figure. Nobody.
He had no barriers. I mean, I had corners in my rooms. He didn't have corners in his rooms. His rooms were panoramas.
The shapes are so. Oh God.
There's so much power. I mean, there's images that I can't ever get out of my head.
He's one of the absolute major titles to do American comic books.
Even when he was doing primitive stuff, he was getting dynamics. He was getting stretch. When he started to hit his prime in the FF, there was mass.
He could make just the simple act of one guy hitting another guy in the face look like, a cosmic calamity.
That's Jack Kirby's action, not violence.
Impact.
Big difference. Nowadays it's violence. When Jack did it, it was action.
He invented all this stuff that people just used years, decades afterwards.
And it changed comics. It changed the industry. It certainly changed Marvel. And then Marvel changed the industry. In those days, they were drawing 5 pages a day. I mean, you can't find people that can draw 5 pages a week.
So he was a genius.
Yeah.
He was just a natural, brilliant talent.
I mean, here was a guy, he was designing architecture,
He was designing planes, he was designing science fiction equipment, and it all looked like it would work.
Thick lines or structure to it is very apparent.
He's thrown up
It's like
against
a
the wall, so
fist
it's
made of
right?
rock.
The
Which
amazing
kind of
thing
makes
is
sense
how
given the
much
thing.
this shit stuck in a way.
It's very sort of based around Jack Kirby.
Comic artist. He said, "I'm a cartoonist," and he was very proud of that.
Jack Kirby is like the king of comics. Jack Kirby did everything. It was just an amazing. You just kind of sit back and watch him. Just one thing after another is coming up with one idea, one concept after another.
What he did to the art form, as well as what he represented as a person, it's a level you're given to measure up to, as well as almost an impossible challenge.
Right.
That artist sticking as a kid, every time I saw it cover, I thought,
Aspiring artist. I didn't like Jack Kirby's work at all.
it was like a love-hate thing because on one hand, I didn't really like it. At least I didn't think I did, but I kept going back to it and I kept looking at it. I avoided reading Jack's because it looked too blocky. Every time I saw it cover, I thought,
Blocky.
it's just blocky. It's not very
Blocky,
good.
blocky,
Everything
blocky.
real chunky and it just looked very realistic. And as a kid, I was like, this guy can't draw. You know, this is ugly stuff. I would look at Kirby and I see these weird black wiggles and stuff and blocky, chunky figures. I'm like, what's up with that?
Artists aren't necessarily drawn to the cruder, tougher stuff.
It is crude, tough
it took,
stuff.
Education for me to like Jack Kirby.
Well, all I can say is I'm smarter than all those other guys you talked to because I liked it from the get-go.
I had an immediate positive reaction to Jack's work. It certainly was kind of off kilter with what I
Such
understood.
structure. Again, it's like
level of
angles and
superhero comics, like the art styles I would recognize, like
Yeah.
Neil Adams or John Romita Sr. But Jack's work I always found graphically appealing.
You know, I keep looking back at my Curry comics going, well, that still looks weird, but it doesn't look as weird as I remember. And then I started going backwards, finding the other things he'd done, and just got hooked on the New Gods and the Fourth World stuff. From there, I went backwards to see what was all this hubbub about the 60s and Marvel and Fantastic Four. And then I discovered that stuff. Just totally blew my mind. And then it got to the point, I said, you know what, maybe I'll try incorporating some of this stuff into my work. And this is before I was a professional. It's like, and then you realize, wait, you know that black squiggly line? That's his kneecap. I had no idea that was his kneecap. And you realize that he was abstracting it all. And then you start realizing these chunky shapes, the power that he would put in the figure. Then you look at it again and you go, wow, this feels 3D to me.
I would buy comic books according to whether or not Jack Kirby drew them. And you just look, and somebody gets you a comic book and says, no, that's Gene Colan. He's okay, but I don't want that. I don't want Gene Colan's Iron Man. I want Jack Kirby's Iron Man. I would get so upset when you see like 3 or 4 people, Don Heck and Gene Colan, Jack Kirby all drawing a comic book. You go, no. Jack Kirby is more of a visceral artist.
Yes.
From the gut. He's
Yes.
It's powerful and dynamic, and in some ways off-putting, because it makes you step back a little bit and wonder what the hell's going on here. And I was interested in drawing. I was interested in anatomy. I was interested in perspective and all these things that a young artist is interested in, and not interested in somebody who had taken all that stuff, put it in his back pocket, and then gone on to create just total action on a page.
So I didn't really like the stories by Jack Kirby because they were monsters. And then one day, and this happened because I got this thing second hand or something, it wasn't like New Understands. I was in art school, or just entered art school. I was beginning to see a whole new world of comprehension and perception opening before me. And then I came across The Double Life of Private Strong. And everything inside was beautiful. It was a real Class A comic book. It looked like a comic book. It was colored like a comic book. It was quite well colored for once, On the cover was this film strip of this character running away from me, or running sort of sideways or something like that, leaping, dropping, rolling, getting up and running again. This was one of the most remarkable pieces of comic book art I'd ever seen at that time. And it was so fluid, so beautiful, so easily done. I'm probably remembering it far better than it was, how things go. But it impressed me deeply, profoundly, I would say profoundly.
It's hard to separate Jack Kirby from the very core of comics, of comic books. There was a comic industry in the newspapers. And there was Hal Foster doing Tarzan and Prince Valiant and Flash Gordon by Alex Raymond and Kniff doing Terry and the Pirates. And these were all wonderful storytelling tricks. But a whole different kind of approach had to be done in a comic book because it was a finite story, trying to compact the story in 64 pages. But the 64 pages generally were more than one feature. So
Cool.
the comic book had to be a different identity.
He knew that for what he wanted to do, he had to develop his own style because he had to work so fast.
Yep.
That was the other thing. He was in a medium that required, a book a week, maybe sometimes two books a week. Who knows? Depending on the company, and then especially in the 40s when they were really turning that stuff out.
People used to always say how fast Jack was, and used to marvel at that. And Jack was very fast, but his amazing lifetime output was at least as much a product of his being willing to sit at the drawing board all day and all night.
They got page rates. Depending on the amount of work you turned out, that's how much money you made.
He would
Persistent.
go to the drawing table around noon every
Yeah,
day,
persistent.
sit there until about 4 the next morning and just draw. And he didn't
Wow.
take vacations, and he didn't take days off.
Yeah,
Wow.
my father worked a lot, so he was basically a workaholic.
You work to make a living, you work to support your family, and the fact that he was an artist doing that really didn't make a difference.
Because he had such a poor background. I grew in the projects of the Lower East Side. They had nothing. He lived in a tenement, and his parents were immigrants from Austria. And I think for him, it was just really important that we were not going to live that way.
Jack was born on August 28th, 1917, in the part of New York where you had to use your fist to defend yourself if you were short.
It was very rough. It was just like he always used to say that he portrayed his childhood, just like the R Gang comedies that were on TV, just exactly like that. They had their street gangs, but their street gangs were very kind of ethnic, the Jewish guys on one block and the Irish guys and the Italian guys. And they get into their fist fights and whatnot, but that was it. Not quite what it's like today. So it was kind of a rough upbringing. But his parents, he had a very close family, and primarily Orthodox Jewish on the Lower East Side, and they were very close, very loving, and he always helped to try to take care of the family, take care of his mother especially.
They lived in this tenement. And the tenements had these long hallways that were very dark. And Jack got a hold of some charcoal or something. And I guess it's about 8 years old. And he just drew on that whole wall, just some outer space fantasy that he had.
And, the landlord went up to his mom and, Jackie's in trouble again. And did you see what he did? And she went out there and looked and, of course, was like, oh, I can't believe he did this. But what he did to her was like, wow, I can't believe my kid did this. This kind of thing.
It was such a powerful drive that he had that he just, he had to do it.
So I think he was always doing it. He read, as he got older, he read quite a bit, science fiction. He loved movies. And I think a lot of it and a lot of his art and his storytelling at a young age probably helped him escape from his harsh environment that he lived in.
So it was whatever he knew about drawing, it was from observation and just practice. I mean, he had that talent. I mean, there's no mistaking that, because if you look at the work that he did as a teenager and as a kid, it's advanced.
He tried going to the Pratt Institute of Art, and I think that lasted. It was a very short time, and then basically the Depression hit, and his father was out of work, and so he started doing street signs for vendors and the vending carts and store windows to help his family make a living. So he never had, as far as I know, he never had any real formal training. Just those artists that came before him and copying their styles.
He had a few pen names, I believe, when he first started. He was born Jacob Kurtzberg, and which was probably a little bit too long at the time, and maybe a little too ethnic for the times as well. So I think he was like Lance Kirby for a while. There was a few other ones.
He did one strip as Jack Curtis. He did one strip as Bob Brown. He did one strip as Ted Gray.
strikes me
And
someone
one script that was signed Kirby, and one script that was
adjusting
signed Jack, and at some point,
to societal
different
expectations,
permutations of the names
potentially
Jack and Kirby
fluid,
came together.
flexible ethics.
Kirby quite a bit, and I think
Potentially.
that's when he decided to go ahead and just change it legally.
Jack's first professional job really was working for Max Fleischer Studios. He started as a cell painter and a cell washer, and eventually he worked up to being an in-betweener.
So you had the main animators doing, you know, the main sets, and then these, you know, little hired hands, the in-betweeners would just fill in all the, you know, 100 cells in between doing the action.
Which he didn't do for very long. It was a factory mentality job, sitting at long rows of desks, and he didn't really like that. It was not a creative job for him.
From there, I think actually he did some newspaper strips for some syndicated stuff before he actually got into comic books.
Jack went to work for a man named Victor Fox, who was very colorful in the comic book business as an entrepreneur and an exploiter of young talent. He would tell us sometimes he would laugh and talk about how guys working for Victor Fox in the 40s, if you wanted to cheat, you'd take a panel and you draw a little airplane in it and then put a big word balloon and said, "Wow." The guy in the plane, he said, "Move on." There were, you know, all kinds of tricks for getting around it, but he wouldn't do that, especially at his peak. I mean, he would just pour that stuff on. The editor-in-chief at Victor Fox's company was a man named Mr. Roberts. There really was no Mr. Roberts. That was the pseudonym. Whoever was the boss that week was Mr. Roberts. And the Mr. Roberts at that time was a man named Joe Simon, who was much more experienced than Jack in comics, having been in the business for about 4 months longer. Joe was doing work on the outside, and he realized that this Jack Kurtzberg guy was a very prolific artist, eager to make money. And so Joe hired Jack to help him with some outside projects. And pretty soon they moved their entire partnership outside of Fox. Joe, on his own, was a talented artist and writer. I think just over the years, people tend to think that because of the enormous output that Jack had, and just how, you know, because of Marvel and everything, that somehow people think that Joe was the businessman and Jack was the creative end of it, and it really wasn't that one. Simon and Kirby very quickly became the preeminent creative team in comics. And it wasn't a question of one writing or one drawing. If you asked Jack who did what, he'd say, we both did everything at different times. Now, that's not exactly true. Jack was more often the penciler because he was faster and more expert at that. Joe handled the business relationships. He was a very good editor. He's very good at talking to publishers. Joe handled the business because Joe came from a different background than Jack did. Joe was from upstate New York. He'd gone to college, and he had a better grasp of business than Jack did, because Jack never really had to get involved in business.
He was the talker, the opportunist, the sort of...
It's always get the job,
Yeah.
do the job, and don't worry about it. The big Simon and Kirby success, of course, was Captain America.
Jack would implement. He was creative, but he was very good at just implementing and doing that very consistently.
Who created new books? They were
and persistently
take almost anything and turn it into something. They went to DC Comics after they did Captain America, and they did a strip called Boy Commandos, which was one of the highest selling comics of its day. They did the Newsboy Legion. They took an existing strip called Sandman and revamped it, and that became a hit. They took an existing strip and turned it into a thing called Manhunter, and that was a huge hit. Afterwards, they went off and they basically invented the love comic. They did a book called Young Romance, which sold millions of copies. They did a book called Black Magic. They did Bullseye. They did Fighting America. You just go on down this list. They just could create a new book almost every week or so.
When he first started Captain America and the other strips he was working on in the 40s, he was really going for speed. You know, they just had to churn out a lot of work in a short amount of time. And so I think you don't see as much detail in that early work than, say, you know, doing some of the later work for Marvel. But it's kind of when he developed the style where, you know, literally the guy's foot's jumping off the page. But they were working pretty fast, so there wasn't a lot of time for detail.
Captain America was a very good selling book, but it wasn't Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. But even then, if you read the old issues of Alter Ego and things like that, the comments of the older artists in the 1940s saying they would look at Jack Kirby's work and they couldn't believe what he was doing then. So I think his work influenced so many people even before the Marvel Age ever was dreamed of. 20 years before the Marvel Age was dreamed of.
The time of Jack Kirby, it was what you'd have to call the ages of Jack Kirby. There's the early age where he's with all the old guys who began comics, and people were just cranking out page after page after page. Then there was the terrible time, 1953, when a guy named Frederick Wortham came down on comic books because he was a psychologist, and he told America that comic books were corrupting our children. And the Congress attacked them in a very similar way to the way America attacked communists, and comic books became no better than toilet paper.
I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty horrifying to think that here are all these people who had these jobs and careers in an industry that suddenly before their eyes is disappearing, and they've just got to get out.
Jack Kirby stayed in, but he stayed in around the edges. He and his partner Joe Simon would go from company to company that survived, and they would create these little comic book companies. Then they would do 3 or 4 titles. They would appear, they would hire all the peripheral guys who had been kicked out, bring them back in for a while, turn out 3 or 4 issues of 3 or 4 comic book titles for Harvey comic books, for Archie comic books, and there was one other set of comic books where they did this group of comic books to try to bring back the more realistic comic books, and each time they failed.
They tried other things. They wrote scripts for television. I think he had a show that NBC was interested in. He tried newspaper strips. He tried he was willing to try anything, but I think comics were
always returned to comics.
The one thing that he could really, as an artist, focus on and just get what he wanted to say.
He wouldn't be pushed away from it. He'd sort of find himself in it.
After that,
and he could be turned away from doing it. Really.
But Jack Kirby went back to his old stomping grounds, Timely Comics, and got together with Stan Lee and started to do comic books again. And that's the beginning of Marvel.
And he went to work for them drawing these bizarre monster. He drew everything. He drew these bizarre monster comics. He drew romance comics. He drew westerns. He drew war for very, very bad money.
All of these stories were done before. Maybe not everyone.
Money not so important
exactly the same way, but essentially that was
the craft was what was important to him.
Jack took those themes and turned those stories into feature-length movies or comic books, and twisted these characters just enough to make them into heroes.
Definitely, without Jack Kirby, there wouldn't be Marvel Comics. I mean, because I think everyone agrees, no matter how many different stories there are about what happened, most people agree that they were shutting the doors before the FF came out. I mean, the way Jack tells it, the way he told it to me was he went up there and they were taking the chairs out.
If you had said, can you go in and make a full range of superheroes out of what Timely had at that time, the answer would be no, that's not possible. But once they began, they could then step to the next one. So you had the Fantastic Four, then you had the Hulk, well, then you had Ant-Man, then you had Iron Man. Then, of course, there was Captain America who was frozen in the ice, or we didn't know where he was. Well, let's go get him. And then there's Submariner. And then you can create new characters, and then let's go dig up some other characters, and let's do this and do that. And after a while, they have a comic book line, but and they have, in effect, the mirror of DC's comic book line.
And the funny thing is, I think I would have been proud to have said, Jack and I did the Fantastic Four and let it go at that. But my gosh, at the same time, we were doing Thor, and we were doing the X-Men, and we were doing Sergeant Fury and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and and I don't even remember all the things. And Jack was equally good at every one of them. Every one of them.
It's as though Jack Kirby's plan
consistency
was to go in and see whatever is around and turn it into something, either stuff that's left over or make new stuff. It finally worked. He took what Stan was doing, and Stan, it's not like Stan was made to change. Stan was still doing his monster stories, except that these monsters turned into heroes. And it worked. Who would have predicted it? I can't even imagine.
Some people say that The initial plan was, okay, we'll revive Captain America, the Submariner, and the Human Torch. Other people say Stan had a vision. Other people say Jack had a vision. It's a little difficult to sort through all these things. But at some point, Stan and Jack put together the first issue of the Fantastic Four. And it had certain elements in it of the strip Jack had just done for DC called The Challengers of the Unknown. It had certain elements of the 40s timely comics. They brought back the Human Torch. But it had a lot in it that nobody had done in comics before. It was a very fresh, new kind of comic. And it caught on.
Somewhere along the line with the FF, Jack broke all the boundaries. You know, he just exploded. His imagination took off. What a vehicle the FF was for him, you know, and he created the FF, you know. And anybody who thinks otherwise doesn't understand Jack Kirby, because you think Stan Lee could have created the FF? No. Stan was the instigator. And frankly, if Jack had written it, it would have been a bust. Stan was a terrific scripter. They were a great combination, Lennon and McCartney, you know. But Jack was the mind behind everything. Jack was the John Lennon. Paul was the guy who made it smooth.
The two of them,
Stan sold the
perfect.
business.
Oh yeah, the two were better than I've ever seen any team before.
Jack made the product. Stan sold the product.
Yeah,
he was the most imaginative, inventive guy I've ever met. I mean, his imagination was incredible. The things he thought of.
If you know Jack's work, you can see all that stuff coming out of Jack's mind. Black Panther, perfect for him. Jack has always been an advanced thinker. You know, people talk about me as being one of the first people to put a black character, a black superhero in the comics. Well, Black Panther came first. Hello, let's not forget.
Well, the thing that made Jack so special to me, he was so great to work with. He never missed a deadline. Whatever you needed. If I said to him, Jack, we're up, it's an emergency.
Consistency, reliability, and an approach to creativity was not just lots of different ideas, but it comes almost fully formed.
Page that wasn't as good as his other pages. No matter how he had a rush, no matter what the conditions were, his quality was always up there. It never slacked off.
I
think that there may be people who have the talent to do what Kirby has done. So I don't want to, I don't want to idolize him so much. But it's Kirby and the world Kirby was in. Stanley said, Jack, do what you want. Jack said, well, I'm going to do this. Fine. Hey, I'm going to do this. Fine. Whatever you want to do, Jack, you do that. That was Stanley's great gift.
I remember the first couple of issues of the FF I was a little bit lukewarm to, because I didn't get it yet. And then
it took them about 4 issues to figure out what they were doing.
But there was a splash page, I think it was in number 7. There was the splash page looking straight up at these buildings, and the Fantastic Four were all being floated up, I think, by Dr. Doom.
There's that great shot in one of the panels of the Submariner climbing the building towards you.
Yeah.
That's another space.
And you go, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. I'm a huge Superman fan. He's my favorite character, but every single Superman story began as Superman returns from a mission in space, and then he gets involved with a story where Lois tries to figure out who he is. And I'm going, I want to see that space mission. Stan and Jack were the only ones who ever did that space mission that I really desperately wanted to see.
Jack worked on all the Marvel superhero books of the 60s to some extent. In some cases, it was advisory or suggesting villains or doing covers and sometimes designing the villains on the covers. But basically, he did this long run of Fantastic Four. He did the early issues of the X-Men and the Avengers. He did the first couple Thor stories, left the book, then came back and did an extended run on that. He did Captain America. He did the early Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. He did a bunch of issues of Iron Man. He did the first couple Hulk stories and came back to that character. He drew whatever they told him to. It's interesting, he did 102 issues of Fantastic Four. If he'd gotten the financial terms that he wanted and the contract he wanted, he would have stayed at Marvel forever, and he would have drawn Fantastic Four as long as they wanted. He could have done 200 issues or 300 issues.
This dissatisfaction with the fact that Jack was so creative and so prolific and could carry a company on his back. And that there came a time when he felt like I should be getting more. I should be given some kind of position should be given a vice presidency. And
Some
frankly,
sort of
I can't
official,
believe that would
formal recognition
it just didn't
of that
seem
persistence.
sense to the company.
Jack left
He wanted
Marvel
the status.
in 1970. He had a dispute which most politely could be characterized as saying that he felt he had not received either the credit for the work he had done there or the money. Some of the money,
And it wasn't the sort of just status seeking. He really deserved the status as well. He wanted what he deserved because of the amount of work he put in and how central he was to these plots.
Frustrations for him with.
But that's how he felt. That's how he framed what his reward should be: recognition and status.
So he went over to DC Comics and he started a series there called The New Gods. He did Jimmy Olsen. He started a lot of new books of varying
Especially when he goes off and it's without Stan Lee now, entirely of his own creativity, he creates some of the most introverted intuition, grandiose kinds of characters.
And he said, "Would you like to come and be assistants?"
New Gods is like nothing else
do it, because what he
in
wanted
Marvel
to do
or
was
DC.
set up a West
No, it's in DC. It's like nothing else in comic books. New Gods.
The only West Coast comic book company was Western, which was doing the animation stuff. Anybody
sort
who
of
wanted
extra dimensional battle of good and evil is
Coast. Jack was the first guy I think they ever
figures that are so powerful. You only see a small projection of themselves into your universe.
Before faxes, before FedEx, everything was the.
You see a similar thing maybe with sort of Lovecraft.
Steve and I,
it's that kind of drive.
Virtue of doing darn near nothing. Jack did not need assistance. If some of his plans had materialized, he would have, but if he was just going to sit there and write and draw New Gods, we were just there kind of to keep him company. And my main function was to say, "Hey, that sounds like a good idea, Jack." He would show us what he had come up with and ask us what we thought. And he also wanted us to write and do things, because he had the idea, as soon as he went to DC, to do the two magazines, In the Days of the Mob and Spirit World. So we were going to help write stuff for that and to come up with any ideas we had, because he was doing 4 books. He's doing Jimmy Olsen, New Gods, Forever People, Mr. Miracle.
I think that Jack expected something different at DC. He expected whatever he expected, and whatever he was dissatisfied with at Marvel, he expected a new ball game. And I don't think that Jack got a new ball game. I think he got the same old ball game.
If in 1970 DC or Marvel had given Jack the exact same contract they gave newcomers in 1985, Jack would have been very happy. He would have gotten the credit and money he deserved. But in 1970, when he said, "Well, you know, I should have some sort of sales bonus in this thing," they told him, "No, we can't do that. No, we can't share the copyright on this stuff. No, we can't pay you. We can't return your original art to you. We can't do all these things that later became very standard." Jack was told in the 60s and 70s the business cannot do these legally, morally, functionally. And one of the rewards Jack had was that he lived to see the comic book business change exactly the way he always knew it would have to change. And of course, the sad part was that he was not in a position to benefit directly from those changes.
I think that sometimes you can be too good and people consider it a threat. I mean, Jack was awfully good. You know, Jack really had no ambitions besides doing what he was doing. But sometimes people interpret it differently. I don't know.
Jack went back to Marvel in 1975. His relationship with DC had soured. He wasn't happy there. Marvel wanted him back. They were willing to treat him marginally better than DC at a time when that mattered. I don't think any company ever treated him commensurate with his worth or value to the company. But he went back to Marvel in 1975 unhappily and did Captain America again. He did a book called The Eternals. He did the Black Panther. He did a book called 2001 based on the movie. He did a book called Machine Man that spun off of that. He did a very weird comic called Devil Dinosaur that was kind of created to be a Saturday morning cartoon show, but never became one. And he wasn't happy there. And finally, he just got out of comics pretty much. He got into animation.
When Kirby left Marvel,
I'm much less of a fan of his DC work. The Marvel work was really the top of it all for me. But Kirby is also so unique in that, and I talked to other creators about this. He's the only person I know that in 3 decades was the top man in his field and reinvented himself each time. So the way he drew when he created Captain America was different than the way that he drew when he sort of created the romance comics and monster comics in the 50s. And then the way that he drew at Marvel, creating the FF, and just within a few years, if you look at from 61 to 65, it's totally different and better every time. And this is, 30 years down the line. So for a guy to have that kind of intense creativity that long, that many pages into his career, is unprecedented.
You probably heard this from other people, Anthony, because it's always a surprise when you meet Jack Kirby. I met him in '68. He was still living in New York, on Long Island. And I was astonished that he wasn't 35 feet tall. That's the biggest thing, I saw that. I mean, I knew what he looked like because he'd done a cartoon of himself, for some Marvel thing, And he always had a cigar, classic stuff, It was James Cagney, basically.
He was about 5'6". He sort of reminded me a little bit of a cross between sort of Jimmy Cagney, sort of George Burns.
In my youthful mind, I saw him as a cross between Galactus and Reed Richards, with some Ben Grimm in his voice, in his locution. But anyway, he was the sweetest guy you could ever meet. He was the star of comics, hands down.
He had a wonderful way with people. Jack was the kind of person who, it didn't matter who you were, he treated everyone the same. If you were a 13-year-old kid came up to him and showed him your drawing, he would look at it and say, "Hey, that's really nice. That's good. You should do this, but keep at it and this." If you were a celebrity that came up to you, he was the same way. He was like, "Hi, how you doing? Oh." And he would say, "Well, so what do you do?" And he'd start, he was really interested in people.
Because my father was just such he was such a humble person that, he just never had any kind of, ego about him whatsoever.
You have to remember that prior to, say, 1970, he pretty much worked in anonymity. I mean, back in Long Island, he worked in what he called the cave, which was the basement of their home in East Williston. And that's where he was. He would draw the books, take him once a week. He'd go into the city.
And during that period at Marvel, in terms of looking at it in a standpoint of home life, at that point, he was doing so many books and churning out so much work. He was working, I don't know how many years, 12, 14 hours a day, a lot of weekends. We lost a lot of weekends. And from a standpoint of being a kid, again, I never thought much about it. It was, it was his job. And of course, he was working at home. So, if I ever needed anything, I could just go downstairs and see him and watch TV with him.
Jack drew most of the early Marvel superhero things in a little airless room at his house in New York, which he called the dungeon.
Back east, all the houses have basements. And this particular studio, I remember because it was just called the dungeon because it was just tiny and cramped and full of his stuff piled up, and there was like no light. And that's where he worked. It was quiet. He didn't really care about his surroundings that much.
It was described to me as having a wall full of science fiction paperbacks.
So not exacting.
Reach behind
not an
himself,
exacting type. He's a determined type.
Pull up phrase of it.
I don't think he valued introverted sensation, but I think it was actually quite strong in his introverted sensation. That persistence, that detail.
And sometimes I go in there, you have the Spanish station.
Consistency. It's all there.
Spanish. That he just liked the sound or the music or just any kind of background, that would help him, I guess, as far as his work, or just keep him occupied.
When they lived in East Williston and he worked in the basement, occasionally fans would come and see him, but there really wasn't a place where people would go and you could meet the guys that drew the comics.
Wait, you came over for milk and cookies on Saturdays.
Yeah.
You would just drive over.
his Roz would force us to have something to eat because
you couldn't go to a Jewish house without having a sandwich.
exactly.
God
So
forbid.
we'd have a sandwich first, then we'd go downstairs to his office, and he'd be drawing away, and he'd be talking to us the whole time. He had. I mean, it was just incredible, and nothing ever stopped him from drawing the whole time he was talking.
Yeah, hand was always moving, producing. Jack had this old drawing board that he had hauled across the country. When he moved from New York to Los Angeles, it was the last thing they put on the van and the first thing they took off in Southern California because he had to go back to work. And it was this beat up. I had a better drawing table when I was 12 years old than Jack Kirby had most of his life.
It was beaten up and battered. It was, fairly standard drawing table. Ink all over it. Just smudged from graphite. He sat in this rigid back wooden dining room chair from a dinette set that the family no longer owned. It's the most uncomfortable thing you'd ever want to sit in. They'd thrown out everything except the wooden chair that Jack liked. He would sit in that chair, just kind of like this, just like that. He's right-handed. And he would just, cigar here when he smoked, and he'd just start. Just go through the night like that.
He used plain old-fashioned pencils, plain old-fashioned paper, an old beat-up ruler. Somehow it just, happened.
I remember when we first moved, it was basically for health reasons, because my mother was an asthmatic and she wasn't always a real well woman. And then I was always sick all the time as well.
The doctor just said it was, either Arizona or California, is where she needed to go. And they had some cousins out here, so they initially moved to Irvine, to the only housing I think that was built in Irvine at the time. And that was in 68. They lived in Irvine for a year or two, but of course they didn't have any relatives or friends there. My mother had some cousins up in Thousand Oaks, so they found a nice little piece of land there and built a home up in Thousand Oaks, moved up there in 1970.
I met Jack in July of 1969, a couple weeks after I got out of high school. We had a comic book club in LA. I was the president of it. And our officers went down and met him. And we sat there all day with our jaws open, listening to Jack discourse on comics and comic history. And right in the middle of the day, the phone rang, and it was Stan Lee calling to discuss the next issue of Fantastic Four. My friends and I just kind of sat there tingling. We were witnessing the magic happening firsthand. And he was this wonderful, gracious host who would answer all our questions and showed us all this artwork he was doing. It was the first time I'd seen uninked Jack Kirby artwork. And my friends and I were just babbling. It is pretty much the way I'm babbling right now. Or we were babbling back then. We couldn't believe we were looking at.
To me, Jack, I don't think he even knew who he was talking to sometimes. We were all kind of one lump thing of his admirers. And he never treated us like a number or anything like that. We were all important to him. But we were just faces and people that would come in and out of his house to tell him our own personal stories about why we would want to make a trek to his house in the first place. Why Jack Kirby was so important to us. And that's the way he took it, just as an offering of gratitude and thanks to everyone that would show up at his doorstep.
We had these people, and people would just show up sometimes. I mean,
It does strike me that
people knew where they lived.
Again, it fits it to me that he's determined and he's
Yeah.
he's
My
not
they were just wanted.
he's not contrarian. That he sort of allows other people to enter into his space. He allows other people to.
Mom made them lunch, and that's how it was at my house. They were just so open to everyone. No one was ever discouraged at all.
Yeah.
It was just an open door policy. So they were just real humble people and very caring. My mother was always feeding everybody. Typical Jewish mother, I guess.
The whole family was fun. Jack was great. Roz was great. Neil, Lisa, Barbara. I mean, it was just fun to be there because they were a great family. And they just invited everybody in. No matter who showed up, it was like, hey, come on in. Let's have a barbecue. Let's go swimming.
There were all sign of introverted ethics there.
Yeah, they were like a second family almost to a lot of people, I think, who would show up there, especially to people who were just starting out in comics who needed some guidance or something, Jack would like say, okay, let me take a look at what you have.
Lynn and I, when we were kids, went to Jack's house and we watched him draw. I think it was in the Galactus storyline.
Well, we watch with effort. The most astonishing natural artist I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
He projected it from his head.
It was all there.
Yeah.
It was the whole page was there.
There was a I mean, I was telling the story because
the whole image in
it
head,
blows my
it just
mind.
come.
There's a
Even
famous
I think the ideas, even the new one, it comes fully formed like that.
Story, which is Steve Rogers in an airport. He's not in costume. He's standing there with his portfolio that the shield is hidden in. And there are people walking in front of him in several layers, people walking past him and behind. He's waiting for someone to pick him up. Behind that, there's this huge panoramic window where you see planes taking off and coming in. Watch Jack draw that. He didn't lay anything out. He started drawing in the upper left-hand corner and drew that page to the bottom right.
We've seen him
I've never seen anything like that in my life.
We saw him do a hand in one place. Just a hand. No rough sketching. No little blue pencil. No rough.
Every time he came over, he would do sketches for us.
It's the image is fully formed in his head. He just does it.
And a foot here, and maybe a belt, maybe something. And what kind of
He's fully across the spatial positional detail in what he then creates.
The whole thing and figure out his perspective. And at the end, he would spend some time balancing his darks, his dark areas, his black areas, and tweaking little parts of the drawing. But the basic structure of the drawing just came out of nowhere.
He would just start drawing. It would be like somebody who, writing a novel, immediately went to a final draft without doing a rough draft.
Yep.
He'd always start. I asked him once, as a matter of fact, and
no second guessing with this guy.
In the middle of the story, he'd think of the middle of the story first, and then create a beginning, and then go and create an end.
I say this all the time. Writing a comic book is very much like writing a song. You have to understand all of the instruments that are going to play, when they're going to play, whether they're going to be loud or they're not going to be loud. You need to build a rhythm through the story, and that's why the best stories, and something again that Kirby just had a gift for. He knew when to make the image small, and he knew when to make the image big, and when to use spread, and when to use splash.
Spatial
all the elements that were
relationships on the page.
You just have to
total mastery of this.
The best way of telling that story.
And don't
I
forget
can see why
that
people would kind of have lots of nice things to say about him. If he's quite,
so if he was sitting there drawing,
he's quite flexible
by the time
with the ethics and lets people bring the admiration. He's just gracious in receiving that and welcoming.
A whole new story.
Then yeah, he doesn't have to be perceived in a negative way by doing that.
Comic books, they would.
It doesn't strike me as actively charismatic or anything like that. But there's a humility, there is a groundedness
whether it's a comic
to him.
It's in computer games or whatever.
And someone who just basically received the praise that people would bring him because of the work he was doing so persistently, so consistently.
As often as not, they destroy the idea that went before and they say, I can do it better, which is not a good way to do it. The idea person says, I have a new idea. And that's what Jack does.
Jack Kirby was one of the most unique artists in the history of art, not just in comic books. And everything Kirby touched was unique. And his imagination spanned so many characters, so many concepts, that they're the types of characters and concepts that keep speaking to new generations. They're not locked into a certain time, although they are of their time. Like things that are universal, Kirby's work, he was a storyteller as well as just an artist. So Kirby's stories, his characters, his visual concepts were both of their time and timeless as well. And you can only find that in very few creators.
That's so cosmological.
Whose work stands the test of time, yet was of its time as well.
He got very excited when he was drawing. He put a lot of himself and a lot of his emotions.
He said before that
drawing.
These superhero comics give you a sense of something greater than yourself.
That meant stretching anatomy, stretching perspective.
Something to aspire to be.
Inventing brand new rules of depth perception.
See that in those statuesque, godlike figures he creates.
I don't think Jack could draw a real car. I don't think he that wasn't Jack. He was a visceral animal. and drew impressions of things.
It almost looks like happy accidents. You know, it's like he's drawing so fast that, you know, the drawing just kind of comes out a certain way. If you really look at Jack's anatomy, it doesn't make any sense. You know, the people look like they look like, you know, robots or toys or something, because the anatomy is just it's almost like mechanical rather than living flesh, and it's almost it has like this weird abstract stylization on it.
If you'd sit around with artists and you talk about Jack's anatomy, you go, it would be like you get the artist that would be critical, you know, and say, oh, he doesn't know how to do anatomy, and then you say, but can you do the power that he can do? Can you do it? Let's just say I ask you to do it. Would you know what to do? Because wouldn't you be essentially held back by what you know, and then have to do that? And then guys would say, and they knew it because they'd examine the work.
Well, Jack drew his figures in time. The fist in the foreground is in a different time zone as the foot in the back. And I think he's the only artist I've ever observed who was able to do that. Someone who might just totally blank out the power of his work might look at something and say, that's a little out of drawing. But that wasn't the case. I mean, Jack in the beginning academically knew how to draw the human figure. As he evolved as an artist, he became an impressionist. Then I think he became an expressionist.
He had this way of like doing these rounded muscles. Then he'd do this straight line through the muscle that represented sinew. But sinew is something that's very subtle. It has slight curves and it goes like that. Jack would do this straight line, then do a couple of straight lines. And in your mind, you go, I know what that is. That's sinew. This is muscle. This is sinew. But it's just a black line. But Jack had this shorthand method of knocking it out. And if you were to say, well, what is that? You know, he has no right to do that. And you go, well, excuse me, I can go to the museums any day and I can say this, I can see the same kind of interpretation done by people whose paintings are selling for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And you're telling me Jack Kirby can't do it? Wrong.
You know, I argue with people. I say, well, listen, this, you know, you're looking at Kirby. Kirby is on a par with Goya when Goya is doing his cartooning. Unfortunately, nobody wants to believe that because Goya's, you know, great artist and Kirby does comic books, and comic books are not, you know. But I just, when I say, when the first picture of the Mole Man is unbelievable. It's so beautiful.
So me as an artist, it just overwhelms me to see that gutsy, ballsy thing, and in a way say to myself, I can't do it. I would like to be able to, I mean, I can't do it, but maybe I'd corrupt myself if I did it. Ooh, that's danger. You go, I like to ink it though. I can do that slashing line.
I mean, all his drawing is just, it's like every human movement is exaggerated. I mean, if somebody was sitting in a chair, it would look like they were moving and they were sitting in the chair at the same time. He didn't like things being still.
A lot of us guys growing up reading Jack Kirby's comic books were so taken by his work that we decided that we wanted to become or try to become professional artists like Jack Kirby. And it's at that time when you go back and deliberately study and dissect that you understand the gift this guy had for composition. Here's a perfect example right here in this Claw comic right here. I'll give you an example of cool composition right here. This scene down here, the way Claw is poised there, that's about as extreme a pose as you can ever get. And this is an extreme pose that us kids reading these would always pick up on when looking at a Kirby comic. We just had to register it in an emotional way without ever knowing the tricks and rules that go into a formal composition or a dynamic composition. It was just there.
I think he was special because he really defined the vocabulary of superhero comics. I mean, before superhero comics really became the predominant genre within publishing, you know, there's romance comics and westerns and horror, and you know, they're all very successful. Now it's just superheroes, and part of that success, I think, is from what Jack Kirby
created, which was the vocabulary. This is how people
Mm.
fly. This is how people smash through brick walls. And this is how you create this kind of godlike power in these figures. You put the legs apart. If you really want to analyze it, you put the legs apart like this, the hips like this, fist, foreshortening, all that kind of stuff. The Kirby crackle. I mean, he invented all this stuff that people just used years, decades afterwards. And we're still building on the sort of core vocabulary that he created, this core code that he created.
One of the things I think people didn't understand was that Jack Kirby was a two-person operation. It was Jack and Roz.
Everybody that loved Jack loved Roz, and you couldn't help do it because she was there to make sure he was able to entertain us.
Basically, my mother ran the roost.
Yeah, she ran the show.
She made sure that he was able to entertain them.
Laid my father's clothes out. Because he would probably be mismatched, and he just didn't care about those things. Everyday things just were not that important to him.
If my father had cash in his wallet, it's because she put it there. I mean, she did everything. I mean, my father, in a lot of ways, was a very typical, eccentric, creative artist, and that didn't care what he wore, couldn't screw in a light bulb. That was a family joke. And just in essence, my mother pretty much, she just ran everything, and my father just kind of did his thing and then went along with the flow.
In his younger days, when he worked in a studio with Joe,
not exacting, determined.
One thing. When he finally went to work for Marvel in the late 50s, early 60s, and he worked at home, it got to the point where he was so engrossed in creating the stories and the artwork that he had to give up driving because he couldn't drive anymore. Neil would tell me stories of where he would get in the car with Jack and they'd start driving and they'd just end up on the curb or on the sidewalk because Jack would be just thinking about the next story.
I was waiting. I don't know what he was thinking, but there was a telephone pole here and the side of a candy store here, and he went up on the sidewalk between them to pick me up. So, So eventually, by the time we came out to California, that was it for Dad's driving.
So she had to drive for him and just took care
Very
of
impractical.
things of life.
Very not practical.
Roz was the most wonderful thing that could have happened to Jack. I could not have imagined Jack function without her. She was a very strong-willed woman. She cared about his work passionately. She went with him everywhere.
I guess you would call her a pistol. She was so full of energy and life. Just a conversation with Roz, you would laugh, and then you would hear her. She was so feisty. I could not believe the woman was the age she was, and to hear her talk about her husband and all her husband went through. She was obviously his defender and his protector. If he would bring up the name of someone who had slighted Jack in some way, man, I mean, I don't mean to be mean, but the fangs came out. I mean, she would say, "Oh, that person, they really shouldn't have done that."
She's so patient with him. She puts up with him. I mean, he was such a pain in the ass. Clearly a pain in the ass. And she just smiles benignly and she makes his world right.
I think she was just one hell of a great lady. This is a woman who could invite into her home, usually without prior notice, a couple of dozen fans, make sandwiches for them, mother them all day long. I mean, that's, I don't know, she was just phenomenal.
I don't think he would have made most of the decisions he made. And I'm not saying those, not the desperate decisions where you have to get work, but making these critical decisions to work on Sky Masters and to do these other things without her, because and she never pushed herself forward as the person who did that. But you would see, you can tell when a man turns to a woman and checks her out, and it's benign, she says, "No, it's fine," she lets it go. It's fine. That silent communication speaks volume.
And she answered the phone. There were times when Jack would, if he answered the phone, somebody would talk him into the worst business deal or the worst promise to do something for free. And Roz would answer the phone and say, "No, we go to conventions." Jack would be there. And Jack did not like doing sketches at conventions because they were just so old, felt exploited by them. But he also didn't like saying no to people. So Roz would say no to them. And she'd stand by him and kids would come up and say, Mr. Kirby, will you draw me a thing? And she'd stop him. And if Jack said no, it was because he knew that Roz would get upset. And sometimes, like, she'd have to go to the ladies' room and she'd turn to me and she'd say, hey, Mark, stand over here and say no until I get back.
I saw some art he had done. There was some 4-page pencil pages. I said, Jack, these are great. And he goes, you like them? And we're looking at them. He goes, take them. I'm like, what do you mean take them? He says, you can have them. This is how Jack was. And I said, can I take 2 of them? It's, rude of me, but he said, sure, take 2. So I take 2 of them. And I just couldn't believe he was handing out this artwork, and I couldn't wait to get it home. And
Yep.
Anyway, we get to
Again,
the door, and
not
Roz,
exactly.
Roz, whoa, where are you going with that? And I said, Jack gave it to me. And she goes, no, Jack didn't give that to you. It goes through me. So obviously I had to hand the pages back, but I ended up buying them a few months later.
She protected him from being exploited, not as well as we might have liked, because Jack was exploited an awful lot in his life. But she managed to keep him at the drawing board every day and to get rid of all the problems that stopped him.
He didn't navigate his relationships with people so well.
His wife has to be a very special person.
Could also be taken advantage of in that way.
I don't think Jack would have survived without Roz.
Roz had this knack of, yes, she took care of Jack, but I don't even know if she ever really consciously thought about it. It was just, they were, in my opinion, this incredibly perfect couple. And sometimes I feel that way about myself and my spouse, where you finish each other's sentences. And they were just this perfect unit, and it worked well. And I don't think that, that I don't want to hear some feminists say that she had the secondary role. Bullshit. It was Jack and Roz.
After Jack passed away, Roz had her moment in the spotlight, and it was a strange. In looking for the silver lining in it, it was a nice thing there where she did get that moment because she was very, very important in his life, and she went to the conventions and she was applauded on her own. She got the standing ovation on her own, not as an adjunct to the guy with the pencil.
Because I think what she felt too is she was a little worried that when Dad passed, that's, she might be forgotten and people wouldn't, it was because of Dad they came around, and it wasn't like that at all. And, I really appreciate the support that she did get.
At the conventions, she would get the same standing ovations he always got. And, people would flock. Yeah, I loved it. With our little booth at the San Diego Comic-Con, when Roz would come over, we'd go from a little gathering around our booth to all of a sudden this big throng of people would be. And it was so cool because they all just wanted to come up and shake her hand and just say how much they admire.
See what else we can see about this.
Mr. Kirby, why do you think your artwork is so popular?
My artwork is popular because it connects with the ordinary person, and they can understand it very easily. And I've always meant it to be so. I've never.
So it's interesting how he was almost inept in terms of sort of looking after most of the day-to-day things. Yet he was also so persistent and so consistent in the work that he created. And I think it's almost that sort of compartmentalization where the work is important, everything else I'll leave to someone else to do. I'm not even going to give it any of my mental energy. I'm wondering something like that, because he doesn't strike me as someone who's weak in sensation.
I've never confined my art to a particular section of humanity. I love people in general. My art reflects it, and that's the way it's always been.
And when did you start actually get your first work published?
Well, I think I began in the animation field, and I did work for small syndicates, which rapidly went out of business, and so I kept to the animation field. I was involved with the Fleischer Studios. I did Betty Boop, and many of the products that the Fleischer brothers were involved with. But that lasted it didn't last too long, and I went on to other things. I did editorial cartoons for, like I said, smaller syndicates. And at that time, well,
His first work, we know
there was a
about
lot
this.
of turbulence in Europe, and that, well, the Fantastic Four was another team adventure, and it gave me a chance to draw teenagers once more. And of course, Reed Richards was their mentor, and the characters and I had a wonderful time. I put them through all kinds of adventures. They were spectacular characters. Reed Richards could stretch himself for a mile, and the characters themselves would create the situations, and it was a kind of a series that became a classic in the field. Captain America is a product of his time. At that time, we were on the brink of war. Hitler was grabbing everything in sight, and Captain America just had to come into being because patriotic fervor was everywhere. And so Captain America became the symbol of everything that was happening in America. And of course, I had Captain America beating up on Hitler on the covers of the comic magazines, and Captain America breaking into Nazi strongholds. And he did those daring things, which Americans dreamt of doing and were on the brink of doing, but we were still biding our time. And of course, the war finally happened, and Captain America still blossomed.
It's less about the character, more about what the character represents again, being a symbol.
What America stood for, and he still is. My character's relationship.
The dark side is another symbol, a symbol of totalitarian evil.
I love people in general, and that's reflected in my characters.
I love people in general. There isn't introverted ethics there.
Himself. Any character I draw, no matter how fantastic that character is, the next guy will always relate to him because despite the fact that he's incapable, the next guy is incapable of doing these superhuman tasks. His motivations and the character's motivations are exactly alike. They're human reactions. And the reader recognizes that. And he recognizes that factor even in the villains. Well, the cosmic characters represent omnipotence. And I felt that we always had contact with that kind of thing. All our myths, all our legends reflect our addiction to create legends. And I feel that's a human quality. And I felt that I had that quality within myself. And I created my own myths, my own gods, the new gods. I felt there should be new gods since we've always been using the old gods. So I felt that it was time to create a new kind of legend. for my readership. And I did. The New Gods was a product of that. And Mr. Miracle was the product of that.
Mm.
And the initial characters that generated this type of magazine, I had already begun to put into my stories. And they became the foundation for these new legends. And of course, these legends stand today. They'll probably become classics that'll go into the 22nd century because they're timeless. The characters are timeless, and we'll always have that kind of character.
That's not humility.
I'm sure that someday somebody will create.
That's not humility at all.
In fact, they're doing it already. Some of the newer books.
Calling his own characters timeless. I mean, it might be true. It's not humility.
Doing some wonderful, wonderful things, and I admire them immensely for it.
And look what Siegel and Schuster did. Superman's going to live forever. See? And Superman's going to be, Superman, as far as I'm concerned, it saved my life. Because I couldn't believe anybody could kill me. Out of 1,000 men, only me and 4 other guys came out. See, people think about war like they think about comics or they think about Broadway plays. They don't think that it's serious, that it's reality. And, but it is. You got to kill that guy. My sergeant hit me on the head with a steel helmet when we were holding a brick factory. And the SS troopers came busting through the door like an arrow flame movie. And try it. You stand in front of the path of a truck. Stand there until the truck is almost on top of you. And you know that you can't get out of the way. And that truck is going to hit you. You stand there and try to take it. And there's this guy coming toward you with a Schmeiser. The Schmeiser is aimed at your head. And this guy looks like a butcher. See? And he's got all the accoutrements on him, and he's going to kill you, and there's no way out of it. And you got your gun on him, and he's got his gun on you. What do? I didn't know what to do. Until a sergeant was yelling and screaming at all the guys. He came over and banged me right on my helmet with his. And I shot the guy. It's like being in front of a Mack truck, knowing that there's no way out. You can't get away from this Mack truck. There's traffic on one side, traffic on the other. You're in the middle, and this Mack truck's coming on you. What do? You tell me. I'll buy it. Well, yeah, we can't do stop it. Yeah. Any way you can. Yeah. I was talking with a lieutenant. Next thing I know, I'm all the way into the factory, and the lieutenant's a red smear on the wall. And he was across the street smearing on a big red smear on the wall. And I'm knocked all the way into the factory. And I run back. I didn't know what the hell happened. I didn't hear nothing or see anything. And there's 3 tanks coming up the street with infantry on both sides. And this guy took a direct hit while he was talking with me. He was from Brooklyn. And he made lieutenant by ROTC in college. And so we had something in common and we were talking. And the next thing you know, no sound, no nothing. Like, there you are on the 4th floor of another building. And you don't know what you're doing there. And this guy's a red smear on a wall. And you can't get more undignified than that. See? And then you're in the real thing. Huh? So what did you do? I did what I had to do. And we were all firing out the windows, and there were two guys waiting for a jeep to take them to, we had two wounded guys, and we captured this pig factory. And I slept in the oven because it was warm. And
you feel like you were maybe daring them by doing that?
oh yeah, you know, the bricks were hot, you know. I might have come out a cookie, you know. And here we are. These two guys, the wounded guys, are standing all bandaged up waiting for this jeep. Next thing we know, the wounded guys are dead, and the Germans are charging in, and it's an Errol Flynn picture, right? One guy, there's a German coming at
You get a sense of real visceral impact in how he describes the experience of war as well. It's very direct, like how he draws.
Okay? And the pictures are spilling out of his hat, you know, all the pictures of the Hitler Jugend and his mother and his father and his girlfriend and him in his Hitler uniform and his whole life, like you talk about pieces, right? And these were all in his helmet. And these guys were so sure they were going to take us that, you know, they kept all those souvenirs. And this went on all the time, every 5 minutes. I was a veteran 5 minutes after I got there. We were sitting there next to a big ravine. Okay, we'll call it a ravine. This ravine travels along France. It's hundreds of feet down. And this is early winter. I can't hear anything. We're sitting, we're replacements. They sit us down in a field, and there's a tent right on the edge of this big cliff. And the wind is blowing hard, and a colonel comes out of his tent with the officers, and he's speaking to us, and I can't hear him. You know, the wind is howling. And the last words I hear is something like, "Oh, there you go." So, and the strange sounds coming up from that wind. I don't know what the hell these sounds are. And then the wind starts howling again and the sounds disappear. You know, we're sitting in this big open, beautiful field. It's so tranquil, you know, the grass is waving back and forth. And the wind is whipping it around, and we can't hear the colonel, we can't. But occasionally, the wind will blow some other direction. And we hear these sounds. And after the colonel's speech, he gives us the old finger, and he goes back into the tent, you know. And they tell us to get up on our feet, and we walk 1,000 feet down this cliff where a tank battle is going on. And those are the sounds we heard. Guys are running back and forth across the Moselle River, naked. A German runs up to me and wants to surrender. He takes his helmet off and I says, "Get the hell out of here." I says, "I don't know where I'm supposed to go." You know, he runs up to me, throws away his helmet, you know, and everything. And he's running around, his shirt is blasted off. And guys are running around the river, the bodies laying around. And we're trying to march someplace. We're trying to find a lieutenant, you know, we're marching in line. And this whole fucking massacre is going on. It's a massacre. And everybody's yelling and screaming, and we're marching in line there, right where was to replace some guys. And finally we do replace them, you know, and the whole thing is over. The Germans are gone, everybody's gone. And there was one shell that hit that I see these Germans laying in a row. It's a beautiful row. They made a perfect circle, except the bottom half of their bodies were missing. See? And the shell evidently hit right in the middle of this group and threw them out in a circle.
Goodness.
Okay? And you see a lot of these nice designs if you're an artist, you know.
So I wouldn't say that Kirby is the easiest person to type. It's quite clear he is a genius in his particular field of drawing, of telling stories through visual imagery. Overall, I would say that LSI is where my instincts are taking me. And I say that because this is someone who, where it has used creativity, he's gone towards very much the grandiose, almost superhero, larger than life, and is very much attracted to that kind of aesthetic of a larger than life, the almost the deeply cosmic and far greater than anything in our day-to-day existence. And at the same time, he was able, in terms of rallying his own day-to-day resources, to work so persistently and consistently on creating these images and doing it with such a mastery of space and how to create movement through space with such such powerful, impactful imagery. It's clear that he is also ideological in his view of sort of that rugged individualism, that anti-fascism, that sense of going against not only the Nazis but also the communists, and thinking in those sorts of terms. Perhaps that's more a product of his age, the age of which he grew up in, I should say. But it is interesting also when it came to creating New Gods, there was such a stark contrast between the good planet and the bad planet, the good dimension and the bad dimension, rather than focusing so much on individual characters. And I think that extends also to how his treatment of everyone is quite welcoming and kind, rather than being in any way selective according to his personal attitudes towards anyone. Now, the problems of LSI lie in the idea of him almost not even being able to drive anymore, not even looking after data thing, not putting on the right sorts of clothes, that sort of thing. And there's a sense here he just does not care about this anymore. He's so focused on his work. He is uninterested in these aspects, even whilst he seems to be a relatively grounded, relatable, down-to-earth individual who is very, again, persistent. There's almost a wholesomeness in how he's able to work towards things and be so reliable and not miss any sort of the deadline. That leads me to think that rather than his introversion being weak and it being sort of a general absent-mindedness, it's more that he has become so compartmentalized on what he's focusing on, which is his creative output in the drawing, that leads to his effect where he almost has to have someone else step in to manage these sorts of things for him, where it doesn't go outside the very narrow purview of his creative output. When he does create, it's very much not trial and error, so much as he has the idea in his head and it just goes onto the paper, which that's the idea of things, something was being fully formed and not trying to trial and error and looking at it and tweaking it. It's similar to even to Beethoven's creativity, where he was able to compose even whilst deaf, to not then listen to what he'd actually created, but just knew in how he conceptualized it that this was how it needed to be listened to. This is how it needed to sound. There's a similarity in how he then draws. Yeah. Clearly no stranger to the rough and tumble of life, both in terms of his war experiences and in terms of defending himself with fistfights as a child. Spoke just in that video in a very sort of stark and very was grisly detail, people being converted to red smears around him, and the idea that you just do what you have to do in that situation. It's almost a narrowing down to just do or die, essentially. And him just relating that quite calmly, not not getting caught up in the stress of the emotivity on it, to say, look, sometimes you have to actually kill people in that situation, and he did. Yes, so these are reasons why I think LSI, despite the lack of the sort of stereotypes one may think in terms of LSI, in terms of being almost disagreeably stubborn. And look, he was stubborn in some things. We can see that, for instance, if people tried to give him ideas on what he should be writing about, he would always take their scripts and turn them into paper aeroplanes. I think that's something which I read recently on him, which again suggests to me again he was not exacting. He didn't mind people in the space. He didn't mind, people coming to his home. He didn't mind any of that, or even though the particular conditions around him were no longer that important. Once he found his way of doing things, he stuck to that. But he was very set in terms of what were the themes, what were the meanings he was going to be writing about, which is the intuition being stubborn. And of this, I think it is introverted intuition. Yes, over the amount of time he's involved in different characters, he contributed to so many different characters. But it's interesting that when he made the full choices of what he wanted to create, he went towards the grandiose, otherworldly, almost Lovecraftian, which strikes me very much in terms of the introverted intuition. And it's that relationship between that sense of something grander and bolder and greater than who we are that dwarves us in comparison to it, and then representing that in such an impactful way on the page. That strikes me as a good balance of both the extroverted sensation and that introverted intuition being the thing he really valued and really pushed. So I think the introverted logic is kind of implicit there. He's in a role where he is not called upon to set the introverted logic, but it seems to nevertheless be guiding him in certain terms of the anti-communist sentiment, certain terms of the anti-fascist sentiment, and the idea that you then have to sort of fight to implement your difference of belief in a sort of aggressive way through these heroes clashing on ideals, and even figures like Darkseid and Isaiah being figures who clash in terms of ideals and what they believe in and their ideologies, even more so than the particular nuances of character, because Darkseid is 100% evil, Isaiah is meant to be wholly good. So these things coming together lead me to think that LSI still makes the most sense, even with the things which don't seem to make so much, which don't seem to fit with what we stereotypically associate with an LSI. And I've seen examples where LSIs have been pretty unkempt, have been pretty inept in a lot of these things, not because they aren't grounded, but because in their growth towards what they feel is most important, the introverted intuition, they compartmentalize everything else. So it's not outside their purview. They're not even handed information. They have no need to be overall practical, competent, and need to be able to do everything for themselves. That's not the point. They must dedicate themselves to that field, to that pursuit, and as a result, other things can then fall by the wayside. And they're quite happy with that sort of pruning. And in a way, LSIs are similar to IAIs in that respect, except that they still start from that sort of more tough, more grounded sense, and they become more detached from that over time. They become more into the otherworldly over time. Meanwhile, I don't see any sign of Jack Kirby having any sort of skill in ethics itself. Yes, he was liked, but I think that's because he was focused on his work rather than saying things that could provoke or change the mood in some sort of way, or even just going off color and that just sort of blending into the group mood, which makes sense for a suggestive function. There isn't much sense that he himself resorted to much use of extrovert ethics, at least from the content I've been able to see today. It does seem very much that balance of extrovert sensation, introvert sensation, and introverted intuition behind something else, which I presume would be introverted logic, given there's no introverted ethics really to be seen leading the charge there. So I hope that is satisfactory to people for why I think LSI makes the most sense. All right. That was a long time spent on Jack Kirby. I think he deserved a long amount of time. I think I wish that documentary would have perhaps gone to a bit more. It was so complimentary. It was almost it was almost hagiographic to some degree, but I think it gives a sense. Anyway, yeah, I hope that helps for people understanding Jack Kirby. Let's go to the fourth person to be suggested. Actually, in terms of timing, is actually the third person. That's Norm MacDonald. All right, let's take a look at Norm MacDonald. Canadian comedian and actor. Quite an old style one as well, back in the 1950s. He was a Canadian stand-up comedian, actor, writer, and television personality distinguished by his deadpan delivery and commitment to unfiltered satirical humor. He was promised as cast member on Saturday Night Live, where he anchored the weekend update segment for 3.5 seasons, starting in 1994, delivering news satire, noted for its dry wit and reluctance to conform to prevailing sensitivities. He repeated mockery of O.J. Simpson during the murder trial coverage, portraying Simpson as guilty by acquittal, provoked network executives, and contributed to his removal from the role in late 1997. Ah, interesting. So already that suggests to me he is a contrarian type, not an obstinate type. He hosted shows such as Sports Illustrated, Sports Desk, and he appeared in films like Dirty Work, where his stand-up emphasized absurdism, anti-humor, and folksy storytelling that resonated deeply with fellow comedians, even as it occasionally clashed with broader audience expectations. He maintained a career in podcasting, late-night appearances to his death from acute leukemia, a diagnosis he battled privately for nearly a decade without public disclosure. Grew up in Quebec. Began pursuing comedy at age 25. And to see what his humor's like. The sets basically showcases deadpan delivery and observational style, draw repeat invitations, and helping transition his Canadian home material to American audiences. And he did his first stand-up routine on Late Dave Letterman. His routine emphasized absurdism and anti-comedic restraint, distinguishing him a bit flashier contemporaries. Plenty of sets. He took his income of writing gigs. The only thing I know about Hemingway is that he wrote a book about bullfighting committed suicide by handgun, which impressed producers with his economy and wit. Signature style and sketches is defined by a deadpan, monotone delivery that emphasizes understatement and absurdity over energetic performance, often featuring long-winded setups leading to subversive anticlimactic punchlines. His approach, but as straight, no frills, allowed him to subvert audience expectations by committing fully to bits that risk bombing, prioritizing comedic integrity over immediate laughs. In sketches, he frequently portrayed oblivious or frustrated characters whose deadpan reactions amplified surreal scenarios, contrasting with the show's typical exaggerated physical comedy. His 10 years weekend update anchor exemplified his style. We read news items in a laconic tone, delivering jokes with minimal inflection and occasional meandering tangents that built tension through apparent disinterest. This deadpan sarcasm extended to non-update sketches, which he impersonated towards Sterling with a dry, world-weary narration over a surreal plot involving Pamela Anderson, heightening the absurdity for his unflinching, straight-faced commitment. Right. His tenure as weekend update anchor had persistent jokes targeting O.J. Simpson during the murder trial, after despite his acquittal. His segments, often written by head writer Jim Downey, employed MacDonald's deadpan delivery to imply Simpson's guilt through absurd, relentless commentary, so portraying Simpson as evading justice or fabricating alibis. The humor drew rapid with acclaim for his unyielding skepticism towards the trial's outcome, but irked NBC executives, including the West Coast president, who was a long-time friend of Simpson, who has socialized with frequent including golf outings. Tensions escalated post-acquittal. McDonald refused to soften the material. Oldmeyer reportedly tolerated the jokes during the trial, but demanded cessation afterward, viewing them as personal affronts. Right. And then apparently contemporaries and later accounts coming from Conan O'Brien attributed the decision primarily to the Simpson Barbs offending Oldmeyer's loyalties. Right. Final extent of McDonald's overall SNL role, effectively ending his time in the show, was replaced by Colin Quinn. He later reflected that while the jokes contributed, internal politics and Oldmeyer's influence were decisive. A view echoed in industry recollections of the executive's protective stance towards Simpson. O'Brien later praised the jokes as brilliant for their fearless, truth-oriented edge. Then played Norma Henderson, a disgraced former NHL hockey player, convicted of embezzlement and tax evasion, forcing community service as a social worker in New York City while barred from leaving the state or gambling. Interesting. Norma MacDonald Live, a weekly video and audio podcast, featuring interviews with comedians, actors, and celebrities such as Adam Sandler, Ray Romano, etc., etc. Was around for 3 seasons. See if I can find that. Norma MacDonald Live. Comedy philosophy. His delivery is marked by a flat, uninflected tone, minimal physical animation, which underscored the absurdity or irony in his material. In later stand-up, he refined it into a more reserved minimalism, claiming on stage to hold no opinions while weaving long-form narratives that meandered toward punchlines. Exemplified with the famous moth joke he recounted on Conan. Let's see if you can find that. His anti-establishment bent manifested in reluctance to conform to industry norms, exemplified by his anti-roast of Bob Saget in 2008, where he read outdated, unfunny jokes verbatim for over 10 minutes to an uncomfortable audience, rejecting scripted vulgarity expected in such events. I'm going to look at that as well. Let's look at some of this now.
Saying Norman Donald, and not all your material comes from the news. Is that right?
No, some of my material comes. My strongest material comes from real life.
Real life.
Like for instance, today I was driving in a car. You were kind enough to bring a car to bring this old chunk of coal here to the studio.
We send cars for our guests. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got in it, and that's I get material that way. So my
What do you mean? How do you get material that way? You get in the car, and what happens?
My driver tells me a joke.
The driver we sent to pick you up told you a joke.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell it now on the show.
Yeah, that's how I get all my material.
Okay. Why don't we just have him on next time?
Oh, that guy. That guy. Oh, wait till you hear me do it. So the guys, he goes, I say, I'll be the guy.
Okay.
A moth goes into a podiatrist's office.
A moth goes into a podiatrist's office. Right?
You are correct. A moth goes into a podiatrist's office, and the podiatrist's office says, "What's the problem?" And the moth says, "What's the problem? Where do I begin, man?" He goes, "I go to work for Gregory Linovich, and all day long I work." Honestly, Doc, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I don't even know if Gregory Linovich knows. He only knows that he has power over me, and that seems to bring him happiness. But I don't know. I wake up in a malaise, and I walk here and there. The podiatrist says, "Oh, yeah?" The moth goes, "Yes." And he goes, at night, I sometimes wake up and I turn to some old lady. in my bed that's on my arm. A lady that I once loved, Doc. I don't know where to turn to. My youngest, Alexandria. She fell in the cold of last year. The cold took her down, as it did many of us. And my other boy. And this is the hardest pill to swallow, Doc. My other boy, Gregaro Ivanilidovich. I no longer love him. As much as it pains me to say, when I look in his eyes, all I see is the same cowardice that I catch when I take a glimpse of my own face in the mirror. If only the cowardice was stronger, then perhaps I could bring myself to reach over to that cocked and loaded gun that lays on the bedside behind me. And in this hellish facade once.
How long a drive was this? Do you live in the valley? Where do you live? Please, sorry.
He says, Doc, sometimes I feel like a spider, even though I'm a moth, just barely hanging on to my web with an everlasting fire underneath me. I'm not feeling good. And so the doctor says, Moth, man, you're in trouble. But you should be seeing a psychiatrist. Why on earth did you come here? And then the moth said, because the light was on.
All right. Let's see the Bob Saget roast.
John Stamos. Okay, I want to start with John Stamos, our esteemed roast master. John. Well, John has a reputation for being a bit of a swinger. Did you know instead of an umbilical cord, John was born with a bungee cord? John likes the ladies. It's true. He has a one-track mind, and the traffic on it was pretty light. You know, John Stamos, it only takes one drink to get him drunk, but he's not sure if it's the 9th or 10th or 11th. And Cloris Leachman is here. Cloris? Cloris, if people say you're over the hill, don't believe them. Why, you'll never be over the hill, not in the car you drive. And Jim Norton up here is, of course, probably one of the most colorful characters I've ever met. Colorful personalities I know. You're green with envy and you have a yellow streak down your back. Greg Giraldo is here. Now, of course, people always say that Greg's a bit of a skinflint, a little tight with a dollar. But I find him to be a real carefree guy. Yep, he doesn't care as long as it's free. That's what kind of carefree guy he is. No, but Greg Giraldo, I'm just joking him. He has the grace of a swan, the wisdom of an owl, and the eye of an eagle. Ladies and gentlemen, this man is for the birds.
Right.
You know, that's good, Greg Giraldo. You know, if I ever need a brain transplant, I don't know if they have those yet, but if I ever need a brain transplant, well, I would choose yours, Greg, and here's why. It's not because you're smart. It's because your brain has never been used.
Susie Essman, of course, is famous for being a vegetarian. Hey, she may be a vegetarian, but she's still full of baloney in my book. Yes, friends. I love Gilbert.
Right.
And what I like about Gilbert Gottfried most of all is his neck. Doesn't he have a great neck, folks? Gilbert, your neck reminds me of a typewriter. Underwood. Oh, by the way, Gilbert, when you go to the men's room later, you'll see a sign that says, "Gentlemen, pay no heed, go right in." There's no room that says "scoundrel" on it. But now we come to Bob Saget. That's why we're all here. Bob?
Right.
Bob, you have a lot of well-wishers here tonight, and a lot of them would like to throw you down one, a well. They want to murder you in a well. Seems a little harsh, but apparently they want to murder you in a well. It says here on this card. Now, the Bob has a beautiful face, like a flower. Yeah, cauliflower. No offense, but your face looks like a cauliflower. As you can see, he has wavy hair. It's waving goodbye on account he's going bald.
See, none of these are particularly good jokes, but it's how he plays them that makes them funny.
Bob should join the Ku Klux Klan.
It's so awkward.
It's not because he's racist. He's not racist. It's just that he'd look a lot better with a hood over his head on account of his face. You know, there are times when Bob has something on his mind, when he wears a hat. He thinks the English Channel is a British TV station and not a body of water separating England and France. Do you know that he has never slept with his wife? Isn't that odd? He says that it isn't honorable to sleep with a married woman, even though she's married to him. Bob isn't the biggest sport.
The way he waits after he says something is.
I took him to a ball game, and he came toting a double-barreled shotgun.
He's a guy who does not care what people think about him.
I said, "What the H is that for?" Bob said, "I heard the Lions were playing the Tigers." You remember that?
Yeah.
Like someone like this can't bomb. He is bomb-proof in the comedy sense.
It's a hat, not a horse race that they race every year.
Right. Right. Okay. So many interviews in.
President Trump boasted at a fundraising dinner last night that he made up information in a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Trump is so bad at lying, he lets the public immediately know he lied. If Trump ever had to take a lie detector test, he'd probably just draw the crazy lines himself. I did
Okay,
not
let's skip to
Today's politics. Joining me now from Santa Monica, California, Norm MacDonald. And now, full disclosure, we've shared many off-camera laughs. He's my brother-in-law. So, hello, Norm. Welcome to Question Period.
Oh, it's great to be here, Joyce, and it's kind of unreal that you're hosting Question Period, but because I remember it as a child with Bruce Phillips.
So you know the show?
Sure, yeah. I know Question Period, W5, all the shows.
When Bruce Phillips hosted Trudeau's father was prime minister, and today it's his son who's running the political show here. Do you think Justin Trudeau is funny?
I don't follow it that closely, but I don't think he's funny. Not like his father was funny. I don't think from just my cursory knowledge and watching of Justin on my prime minister, I shouldn't call him Justin, of prime minister on YouTube, that he seems not to have inherited his father's flinty intellect.
You met Donald Trump when he was on the Tonight Show on Jimmy Fallon show. Now, tell us about that encounter you had with Donald Trump.
Well, I'd met Donald Trump many, many times in New York City, just because when I was doing Saturday Night Live, he was a fixture in New York City, and he'd come to a lot of the shows, and he was just a local eccentric, that people mostly loved in New York because he fixed the rink in Central Park when the city couldn't. But no, when I was on Jimmy Fallon, that's when Jimmy Fallon tousled his hair, and got in trouble for it, and I was the other guest. So I was just out in the hallway, and I said, Donald, can I have a picture? You can call him Donald then. I guess you can still call him Donald. We don't have to call him President, apparently. But I said, can I get a picture with you? And he said, yeah, absolutely, sure, Norm. And then he walked down the hall and got in the elevator with a Secret Service guy. So, but he was just doing it as a joke. A lot of times, the problem with candidates that, or political candidates that do comedy is obviously comedy doesn't translate well to the page sometimes, sarcasm is lost, obviously, and things like that. So if someone says something that's meant self-disparagingly or satirically, and you want to take it out of context, you can. That happened a lot of times with
very matter of fact
campaign trail.
But he's being caricatured on Saturday Night.
Very deadpan, even when he's not doing a comedy act.
Is it funny to you? Is that funny?
No. The only reason I don't find it funny, when I was there, Daryl Hammond did Donald Trump, and that shows how far back Trump goes, because that was 20 years ago. But Daryl did him then. It was a softer Trump. I think it was a Trump that was a lot closer to his real self. But if you do an impression of someone,
Trump was far closer to his real self.
You're playing the person. People
some introvert ethics there.
So you can't play someone and have contempt for them at the same time. It doesn't work as an impression. So I don't like his impression, and I have no political affiliation. I just mean from a comedy
Would
level.
appreciate the character someone is trying to play.
Trump, because he
Can't do a contempt.
Yes, but other people think he's funny too. I attended one of his just to see, because I wanted to see it for myself. His performances in front of these grand halls, and he's enormously funny and entertaining. And I don't know that there's normally with politicians. It takes, you need to be humble, to be really funny. And I think that's why Ronald Reagan was the funniest president that I ever saw, because he always had this humility to him. I was kind of lost with President Obama, because people told me he was funny, but to me he was too self-aware, and of course Hillary couldn't have been more strident, and I
Doesn't
think
like
people
stridency.
don't vote on
Doesn't like
issues
stridency.
as much as they just vote on who they'd like this. That old saw about who you'd rather have a beer with, and nobody want to have a beer with Hillary Clinton,
You say that that one person has to be humble to be funny, but I don't think Donald Trump is very humble, is he?
No, there's no humility to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is more funny in the way that a WWE wrestler is, So he has a different kind of funny, which is a sort of a self-deluded. I don't know if it's self-delusion though. I don't know if it's all. I think it's just all an act. I don't think really that Trump ever wanted.
It's funny. He's not. He's trying not to mischaracterize him either.
Playing to be president, whatever that hall he was playing in was, and I've seen this happen with comedians too. That
there's potentially some good faith judgment there.
People that come to see you all like you, but the reason they came to see you is because they like you. So politicians and comedians both make that mistake of thinking they're much better than they are because they're never criticized by the people that don't like them. That's why social media is so good.
There's nuance here.
You can see the people that don't like you at all.
I listened to an interview you gave Larry King, and you said the ruin of Donald Trump will be his addiction to playing the halls, right? So he's a great performer. He just wanted to be you, like he wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and he just accidentally became a president?
My guess would be that his plan was to make a big splash, lose. Oh, that's not good. What should we do now, Joyce?
Just don't answer, okay? If it's possible.
No, I won't answer.
Yeah.
So should I start answering that question again?
Sure.
Yeah, I think him
very deliberately unpolished. I think what the point is, his humor is very unpolished.
People don't remember, but back in the debates,
just what it is, all the mess out there.
Issue with Donald Trump saying if he lost, it meant be like, are you kidding me? I know, I did. Oh, 1 second. Hello? Yeah. Oh, I gotta call you back. I'm on TV, man. Yeah, I'm on the TV right now. Oh my God. Okay, I'll call you right back. Sorry.
Okay, I'm not gonna ask you the question again.
I feel that Trump, personally, I feel that he didn't think he was going to become president. And interestingly, the thing that people don't remember was that, what I remember, was that during the debates, there was all this talk of Donald Trump saying, if he loses, it means the election is rigged. And all the media were saying, no, that's impossible. Take that back. You cannot say that about the American Republic. No election here could ever be rigged. That's impossible. And of course, now they're saying the exact opposite. But I think it was Trump's idea at that point that he would say it was going to be rigged, thinking he thought Hillary was going to win, I think. And then he would start a network or something like that where he could speak and be the loyal opposition of his own, something different than Fox.
Let me ask you this. So your Bob Dole imitation was pretty famous back in the day. So would you do Donald Trump today? Would you do a Donald Trump imitation?
I try to not do comedy about Donald Trump because I think I had one joke about Donald Trump that I ever did where I said that Americans hated Hillary Clinton so much that they voted for someone they hated more than Hillary Clinton to rub it in. And that's the only time I ever made a joke about Trump. But I try to stay away from it because it's just, it's low-hanging fruit. And also, Trump oftentimes is doing self-parody. And nothing looks dumber than if you parody self-parody. You really get caught not understanding.
So comedy in the time of Trump, is it more difficult than it was when you were on Saturday Night Live?
It's more difficult in the time of Trump for good comedians, and it's way easier for bad comedians. You know, you don't have a worldview by just saying you don't like Trump. You know what I mean? That doesn't count. Like, you can't.
He's just being himself in his interview. He's not.
And
He's not caught up in a certain act.
Democrats just can't.
But he also does not give. Also does not care what people think about him. It's quite clear he does not care. He's totally calm and chill in terms of who he is.
For it, it's an easy time because you go, well, that guy's the idiot, not me. But if you try to do smart comedy, it's better to stay away from Trump. You know.
Norm Macdonald, thanks so much
for this. This is gonna be funny.
I'm Norm Macdonald, author of Based on a True Story.
I had to check the title of the book before he says what it is.
Gotcha.
All right, so first one is Young Women.
Oh, Young Women should get this book because it's the story of a handsome man with long blonde hair that rides on a horse. Yeah, that kind of thing.
So the next is Truck Driver.
Oh, truck drivers would love this book because, well, what it really is a travel brochure on where to get the best amphetamines.
So the next group of readers is Guy Waiting Online at CBS.
Oh, a guy waiting online at CBS? Yeah, he'd love to read this book.
See this. See what got him fired.
Potential jurors for the O.J. Simpson case were asked to fill out a 75-page jury questionnaire this week. In the entire state of California, only one person got a perfect score. Xiao Ming Wu, who after the trial plans to attend Caltech. By the way, you can now purchase a bronze statue of the Juice for only $3,395. And for an even $5,000, you can buy one that Al Cowlings has kissed the ass of. O.J. Simpson's new fitness video was released this week, and hitting the shelves next week, Simpson's newest video, Dwarf on Stalking. Crowd is torn. According to retailers, the most popular Halloween mask this year is O.J. Simpson. And the most popular Halloween greeting is, I'll kill you and that guy who's bringing over your...
So Isaac, I'm leaning SLI really. I'm leaning SLI for Norm Macdonald rather than EII.
Book this week contains a series of essays examining faith.
He just so sort of chilled and does not care how he comes across. Like, there's no overthinking. You get a bit of overthinking with an EII.
Which states he never loved Princess Di, and that his father pressured him to marry her. The book is entitled, Of Course O.J. Did It. I mean, come on.
Just confident.
Simpson says that he would have taken a bullet or stood in front of a train for Nicole. Man, I'm going to tell you, that is some bad luck when the one guy who would have died.
Here's an early interview of Norm Macdonald.
Millions of people don't have any food in the world, so let's eat.
So much to share, so much to eat. But there are those who are less fortunate. Perhaps we should comment on those people for us.
Well, Jan Murray is, I think.
Jan Murray.
He's worse off.
Outside.
Well, I mean, nobody really wants to be Jan Murray. You'd always rather be yourself. I mean, you're not taping this, are you, Randy?
Thank you.
And then Roberta Duran says to the other guy, "No, you blow it up this time."
Oh, Jerry Lewis, the act for Jerry Lewis, the telephone guy. Any of those caps that I wear, it's always a love. Either that or the hi.
Right.
That feeling that what it is that a creative person does, whether that be as an artist or as a creator.
Really does not care what people think about him at all.
That's your word.
Genius.
Genius would be more.
Being very confident, also being very quite awkward. That is him just not caring how he comes across to people. Just total disinterest in that.
Jenna.
Dino, man, it's me. Bill couldn't be with us.
I don't know what else I can learn about him. So it's very much everyday absurdities with a bit of zaniness. It's nothing too grandiose. I think it does reflect, I think, extrovert intuition, introvert sensation being the area of value for him. Accusation of insensitivity. Okay, yeah, we can expect this sort of thing to happen. Doesn't like the sort of walk on eggshells thing. Relief that meeting slow down a little bit. Argue risk punishing individuals without due process. Is accused of lacking sensitivity there. And then Bar's controversial statement comparing Valerie Jarrett to an ape player was not racially motivated since ambient makes everybody the same color. Yeah. Yeah. Classic extroverted ethics, vulnerable problems there. Rarely talked about his personal life. Shielding his private affairs from scrutiny. Gambling addiction. Okay. His escape from deeper anxieties, perhaps fear of mortality, called chronophobia. Preferred the immediate dread of losing a bet, such as a football game, over obsessive rumination on death. Continued to occupy his mind amid an otherwise introspective and solitary lifestyle. Yeah, that sort of, we find it with introvert sensation leading types, there's sort of, when they do approach the future and they approach ambiguity, it's almost a sense of fatalism, and they do not like the fatalism. They want to be surprised out of the fatalism. That's sort of introversion traditional role can create that. Identifies Christian, but also not a particularly good one. Again, there's a tendency of Delta introverts to be, I'm a mess, let it all hang out. This is me and my complexity. I'm trying to be better, that sort of thing. June 2013 appearance said, I'm a Christian, it's not stylish to say that now. I expressed skepticism towards the evolutionary theory, saying I do not believe in DNA, the explanation of human origins. So his faith as a deliberate choice amid cultural pressures. There's some deadpan delivery, unwavering commitment to punchlines over audience approval, and subversion of comedic expectations resonated with subsequent performers. And that's it. He sticks to the joke even when the audience is not giving a clear approval to it. He just completely shuts that off. Let's see the podcast. Let's see.
Yeah, do you know Nikki Cox?
Yeah. So Jay.
She's with Jay.
Think about a podcast like that. It's basically like a regular thing. People come round. People feel comfortable in the environment. That kind of idea. Very chilled. No clear direction to it.
What? Wronger. Wrong. More wrong. What do you think is more wrong? Having sex with a child, human being?
I think he's SLI.
Like, you've got to do one. That's the
You got to do one. You're on a deserted island. But do you actually think that they would like a man's sperm?
A human
being sperm? A woman?
Well, who?
A woman.
A woman would like a man's sperm. Well, yeah, she's been biologically programmed
In her
through
mouth?
millennia.
But in your mouth, like, isn't that stuff like living? That like those animals, little tiny.
I'm surprised if you tend to make somebody laugh and they don't laugh. That's funny.
To be a funny thing. Usually,
I feel that I haven't.
What's one like that? You could figure it out. The teacher wouldn't have a stupid opinion about it.
I don't not that, by the way. I don't like sucking.
You don't like sucking off?
I mean, I have done it.
Yeah, I wouldn't like it. You know why I wouldn't like it?
What?
Aren't those animals like inside the cum? Like I remember
the sperm, you know?
Yeah. So to me, like it's a bunch of animals and stuff. But you remind me of a guy that's good at
No good at networking, terrible at acting, terrible with executives, terrible at collaborating. Say whatever I want to say, but I think I'm good enough comedy that I can survive. Don't have an ambition for money. Yep, fits SLI. No extroverted ethics, no interest in extroverted sensation. Lots of humility, just let it all hang out mentality.
They smoke pot 4 times a week.
No polish
like,
at all.
I'm not admitting I'm like you.
4 times a week seems like a lot.
Does it really?
A little, yeah, but
well, it's all relative.
It's all relative.
Yeah, as long as it's not hurting anybody.
Yeah. It doesn't, as long as it's not hurting anybody. But what about the audience, the stand-up audience?
So
It's kind of disconnected. It's way too big for the likes of me.
It's your dream view.
For a million someone who can fill the stage with movement and energy, just like a small man on a big stage. And they've been connectedness, a certain amount of intimacy is important to him.
After what?
He'd rather fill a small space than be in something huge. There's no that sense of introverted intuition is not actually valued by him.
Up from San Diego.
That's the order and simplicity of sports. And an ending, arguing with friends about it, but in the end, you still like sports. Yeah. Simplicity.
Yeah. You hungry? I go.
Yeah. I think that's a lie.
So you said, yeah.
Yeah, I go, yeah, and he took me to.
I'm hungry. I'm hungry. What do you think? I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Plus, I want some food. Do you feel you have white privilege?
I'm not allowed to answer those questions. Being a old white guy with extra money.
Your great special that is on Netflix now,
Yeah.
everybody should watch, is called
Straight White Male 60.
Young people won't like old people. When I was a kid, I got involved with Al Jolson when they brought. I didn't know what. No, back in the 1920s. I was just a kid when the jazz singer came out. Charlie Fox. He wrote the theme music to Happy Days, The Love Boat.
Yeah.
He wrote just about everything.
He must make a heck of a lot of money.
I'm going to ask him something. Just how much do you make?
What would Norman Lear say to that?
What?
I say, what would Norman Lear say to that?
Who's that?
Fuck!
And now the whole set went quiet, and you hear people going, Santa's just said fuck. Santa has just said fuck. And all these kids froze, and then they had a Disney guy. He said fuke. Fuke. It's a Swedish word. Means take a break.
We're supposed to take a break. And so he thought when you said take a break, that I would go, speaking of taking a break.
Yeah.
Apparently he's going to do this show.
All right.
Really? Oh my God.
Yeah, I think it's SLI.
Actual talk show host will kill himself.
Lots of simplicity, very down to earth style, likes relatability, likes humility, very deadpan style of comedy, one which depends on him not caring what anyone thinks of him. That is the key aspect here, which is why it's both confident and it's awkward, because he knows the jokes aren't, there's no finesse to the jokes. He's not trying to take anything he does seriously, and that's why it's funny. And it's sometimes absurdist, it's sometimes very, very silly. But the point, no matter how bad it might get, the fact he keeps doing it confidently becomes the humor. So yeah, that makes sense to me. And also where he does feel ambiguity, it's about things like death, it's about things like where are things going further along. The things beyond his experiences can be scary, and he can fall into certain fatalism. And so going to something like gambling can get him out of that sort of, can force him to not reflect on anything sort of morbid. But what he really wants is sort of more down to earth experiences. And he seems to be having those with this podcast, for instance. Yeah, the extrovert ethics also can backfire in terms of when he says something publicly, then leads to a backlash. I mean, football and defensive. And similarly, when he got fired from SNL for talking about O.J. Simpson a bit too much. Yeah, I think that it's entirely coherent with SLI over the other types. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for for helping me to make another good live stream. Greatly appreciated. Hope you all have a lovely week ahead of you. I'm wishing you all the best. Thank you.